What happens when the most powerful woman in the city loses everything, and the man who saves her is the one person she never saw coming? When Ethan Cross found his CEO sitting alone on a corporate floor at midnight, stripped of her armor and her control, he had no idea that one impulsive joke would unravel both their lives. Tonight, a single father with nothing to lose and a billionaire with everything at stake are about to collide in ways neither of them can predict. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The 43rd floor was supposed to be empty. Ethan Cross had made this walk 100 times before, past the silent cubicles. Through the glass corridors where the city lights bled through like something out of a dream, people stopped believing in around age 30. It was nearly 11 at night, and the building had that hollow quality that comes when a place designed for thousands holds only the hum of servers and the occasional flicker of a screen left on by mistake. He'd stayed late because the inventory reconciliation system had thrown errors again, the kind that would cascade into chaos by morning if someone didn't catch them now. That someone was always him. Operations manager sounded impressive on paper, but in practice it meant being the person who fixed what everyone else broke, usually after hours, usually alone. Ethan didn't mind the solitude. It gave him time to think, to breathe, to exist in a space where no one needed him to be anything other than competent. At home, he was dad, the person who made breakfast, checked homework, kissed scraped knees, and somehow kept a 7-year-old's world from falling apart. Here, in the empty tower, he could just be Ethan for a few stolen hours. He rounded the corner toward the executive wing, a route he took purely because it shaved 90 seconds off his walk to the server room. And that's when he saw her. Isabella Hart. The Isabella Hart, CEO of Vanguard Systems, youngest woman to ever helm a tech conglomerate of this size, a person whose face appeared on magazine covers with titles like The Future is Her and Power Redefined. She was sitting on the floor outside her office, back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of her like she'd simply run out of the energy required to remain upright. Ethan stopped walking. She wasn't crying. That would have been easier to process somehow. She was just sitting there, staring at nothing, her expression carved from exhaustion and something darker. Her blazer was draped across her lap, her blouse wrinkled, her usually immaculate hair pulled into a careless knot that had half come undone. He should have kept walking. That was the smart move, the professional move, the move that wouldn't complicate his life in ways he couldn't afford. But Ethan had never been particularly good at smart moves, especially when someone looked like the world had finally won. Ms. Hart? Her head turned slowly like she was moving underwater. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize him, which was fair. He doubted she'd ever noticed him beyond approving budget reports or nodding in elevators. Then something clicked, and she blinked. Ethan Cross. Operations. Yeah. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how informal he must look. Sleeves rolled up, tie gone hours ago, coffee stain on his shirt from when Lila had ambushed him that morning with a hug. Are you okay? The question hung there, stupid and obvious, because clearly she wasn't okay. You didn't sit on a corporate floor at 11 p.m. if things were going well. Isabella let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had contained any humor. Define okay. He didn't have an answer for that, so he just stood there, waiting, giving her the space to either dismiss him or say something real. The silence stretched long enough that he started calculating his exit strategy, apologize for interrupting, wish her a good night, pretend this never happened. Then she spoke. I can't go home. The words came out flat, matter of fact, like she was reporting a system failure. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? I mean, I can't go home. My penthouse is being fumigated. Emergency treatment for some kind of infestation they found in the building's ventilation system. They evacuated the top 4 floors this afternoon. I've been trying to find a hotel for the last 3 hours, but apparently there's some kind of medical conference in town and everything's booked solid. She said it without emotion, which somehow made it worse. This was a woman who could buy a hotel if she wanted to, and yet here she was, displaced, exhausted, and apparently out of options. Ethan's mouth moved before his brain could stop it. You could crash at my place. The words landed between them like something fragile and dangerous. Isabella's eyes snapped to his, sharp now, the exhaustion momentarily burned away by sheer surprise. What? He should have backpedaled, should have laughed it off, made it a joke, walked away before the offer became real. Instead, he doubled down. I'm serious. I've got a couch. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean and it's available. My daughter's asleep by now, so it's quiet. You look like you could use quiet. Isabella stared at him like he'd just suggested they rob a bank together. You're inviting me, your CEO, to sleep on your couch. Yeah, I guess I am. That's insane. Probably. You don't even know me. I know you're sitting on the floor at 11 p.m. because you have nowhere to go. That seems like enough. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For someone who commanded boardrooms and terrified investors, she seemed genuinely at a loss. Ethan waited, letting her work through whatever internal calculation was happening behind those tired eyes. Finally, she said, "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question. He thought about it for a moment, about the real answer versus the answer that would make sense. Because I've been where you are, he said quietly. Maybe not exactly. I've never owned a penthouse or run a company, but I've had nights where everything falls apart at once and you just need someone to throw you a rope. Even if it's a stupid rope that doesn't make any sense. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude, or just the bone-deep relief of not having to fight for 5 more minutes. I don't have any of my things, she said, and it sounded almost like a concession. I've got an extra toothbrush. Lila's dentist gives them out like candy. Lila? My daughter, she's 7. You'll probably meet her tomorrow morning when she interrogates you about whether you've ever met a real astronaut. Isabella laughed then, an actual laugh, short and startled and real. I haven't. Yeah, well, that's going to disappoint her. She pushed herself to her feet, slower than someone her age should have to, and picked up her blazer. Up close, Ethan could see the fine lines around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she moved like someone who'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will. This is a terrible idea, she said. Probably, he agreed. I'm going to regret this. Maybe. You're not going to let this go, are you? Nope. She sighed, and it was the sigh of someone who'd run out of the energy required to argue. Fine, but if your apartment is a disaster, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. They walked to the elevator in silence, and Ethan tried not to think about how surreal this was. Isabella Hart, billionaire CEO, following him home like a college friend crashing after a bad breakup. The elevator descended in that slow, mechanical way that gives you too much time to second-guess your decisions. And by the time they reached the parking garage, Ethan was 90% sure this was the worst idea he'd ever had. His car looked even more pathetic than usual next to the sleek executive vehicles. It was a 7-year-old sedan with a car seat in the back and a collection of Lila's drawings taped to the windows. Isabella paused when she saw it, and for a moment he thought she might change her mind. Instead, she just said, "Nice drawings." Lila's an artist, or she will be, once she stops drawing exclusively dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are a solid choice. They drove through the city in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. Ethan kept stealing glances at her, trying to reconcile the woman in his passenger seat with the figure he'd seen in conference rooms and company announcements. Without the armor of her office, she looked younger, more human, more like someone who could actually fit into his life instead of existing in some parallel universe of wealth and power. His apartment was in a neighborhood that real estate agents called up and coming, which meant it was affordable if you didn't mind the noise and the slightly questionable plumbing. He parked in the cramped lot behind the building and led Isabella up 3 flights of stairs. The elevator had been broken for 2 weeks. To a door with a faded welcome mat and a construction paper rainbow taped at kid height. "Home sweet home," he said, unlocking the door as quietly as possible. The apartment was small but clean, decorated in what Ethan privately called functional chaos. Lila's toys organized in bins along one wall, a couch that had seen better days but was comfortable enough, a kitchen table covered in homework and coloring books. The walls were covered in Lila's artwork, layers of crayon and paint and imagination that made the space feel lived in rather than empty. Isabella stepped inside and looked around, and Ethan couldn't read her expression. Was she judging, pitying, regretting every decision that had led to this moment? "It's nice," she said finally, and she sounded like she meant it. "It's small." "Small isn't bad. Small feels—" She trailed off, searching for the word. "Safe." Ethan wasn't sure what to do with that, so he just moved to the linen closet and pulled out a blanket and pillow. Couch is all yours. Bathroom's down the hall. I'll get you that toothbrush. He rummaged through the cabinet, past Lila's bubblegum-flavored toothpaste and the collection of rubber ducks she refused to part with until he found the spare toothbrush still in its packaging. When he came back out, Isabella was standing by the wall of drawings, studying them with an intensity that seemed out of proportion to crayon dinosaurs. She's talented, Isabella said softly. She's 7. Still talented. Ethan handed her the toothbrush and a towel. There's coffee in the kitchen if you wake up before me, which you probably will since Lila has an internal alarm set for 6 a.m., regardless of weekends, holidays, or common sense. Isabella took the items, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. Thank you, Ethan. Really. I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you. He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Get some sleep. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. She nodded and disappeared into the bathroom. Ethan stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, wondering what the hell he'd just set in motion. Then he went to his room, checked on Lila. She was sprawled across her bed in the boneless way only children can achieve, clutching a stuffed brontosaurus, and collapsed into his own bed without bothering to change. Sleep didn't come easy. He kept thinking about Isabella sitting on that floor, about the exhaustion in her eyes, about the strange vulnerability of someone who commanded millions but couldn't find a place to sleep. He thought about the way she'd looked at Lila's drawings, like they were something precious instead of just the clutter of family life. He thought about how badly this could go wrong. Morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train, which in this case took the form of Lila barreling into his room, bouncing on his bed and announcing at full volume that there was a stranger on their couch. Ethan groaned and pulled the pillow over his head. Lila. Indoor voice. But Dad, there's a lady on our couch. I don't know her. Is she a robber? She's not a robber. How do you know? Because robbers don't sleep on couches. They rob things and leave. Lila considered this logic. What if she's a sleeping robber? That's not a thing. You don't know that. Ethan gave up and dragged himself out of bed. Lila was already racing back toward the living room, and he followed, still half asleep, trying to figure out how to explain the situation in terms a 7-year-old would understand. Isabella was already awake, sitting up on the couch, looking significantly more put together than anyone had a right to look after sleeping in their work clothes. Lila stood a few feet away, studying her with the intense scrutiny of a detective interrogating a suspect. Hi, Isabella said carefully. Hi, Lila replied. Are you a robber? Lila, Ethan warned. I'm just asking. Isabella's lips twitched. I'm not a robber. I'm a friend of your dad's from work. Dad doesn't have friends from work. Lila. What? You don't. You always say everyone at work is either incompetent or exhausting. Ethan closed his eyes. Thank you for that, sweetheart. Very helpful. Isabella was definitely smiling now. Well, I promise I'm neither incompetent nor exhausting. Most days. Lila tilted her head, considering. Have you ever met an astronaut? Unfortunately, no. Oh. Lila's disappointment was visible. That's okay. Dad hasn't either. Do you like dinosaurs? I do, actually. What's your favorite? Probably the velociraptor. Lila's face lit up. Those are smart ones. Not like the T-Rex that everyone thinks is cool, but actually has tiny arms and can't even scratch its own nose. That's a very good point about the T-Rex. I know. Ethan watched this exchange with a mixture of amusement and terror. Lila had no filter on a good day, and this was rapidly becoming a day where all his carefully separated worlds were colliding in real time. Lila, why don't you go get dressed while I make breakfast? He suggested, hoping to regain some control of the situation. Can Isabella stay for breakfast? He glanced at Isabella, who looked somewhere between amused and uncertain. If she wants to. I don't want to impose, Isabella started. It's just eggs and toast, nothing fancy. Please stay, Lila said, deploying the puppy dog eyes that Ethan had never successfully defended against. I want to tell you about my dinosaur book. Isabella looked at Ethan, something unreadable in her expression, then back at Lila. Okay, I'll stay. Lila cheered and ran off to her room, presumably to get dressed and gather the aforementioned dinosaur book. Ethan moved to the kitchen, acutely aware of Isabella following him, of how small the space felt with both of them in it. I'm sorry about her, he said, pulling eggs and bread from the refrigerator. She's enthusiastic. She's wonderful, Isabella said quietly. You're lucky. Something in her tone made him pause. He glanced back at her, at the way she was watching the hallway where Lila had disappeared, and he recognized that look. It was the look of someone who'd traded everything for success and was just now realizing what the cost had been. Coffee, he offered. Please. He poured 2 mugs and handed her one. She wrapped her hands around it like it was winter instead of late spring, drawing warmth from the ceramic. This is surreal, she said. Which part? All of it. Yesterday I was managing a board meeting about quarterly projections. Today I'm in my operations manager's kitchen drinking coffee while his daughter quizzes me about dinosaurs. If it helps, I'm finding it pretty surreal too. She smiled, and it was different from the polished smile he'd seen in meetings. Softer, more genuine. How long have you been doing this alone? The question caught him off guard. What makes you think I'm doing it alone? Context clues, single car seat, no sign of another adult. The way you move through this space like someone who's used to doing everything himself. Ethan cracked eggs into a pan, buying time to decide how much to share. 3 years. Lila's mom left when she was 4. Decided motherhood wasn't what she signed up for. I'm sorry. Don't be. We're better off. Lila doesn't remember much, and I got used to it. He flipped the eggs with more force than necessary. You learn to adapt. Do you? Isabella asked quietly. Adapt, I mean. Or do you just get better at pretending? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw someone who understood that question on a level most people didn't. Maybe both. Lila returned before Isabella could respond, now dressed in mismatched clothes, purple leggings, a green dinosaur shirt, and rain boots despite the clear sky, and carrying a book that was roughly half her size. Breakfast was chaotic in the way meals with a 7-year-old always were. Lila talked non-stop, showing Isabella pictures of various dinosaurs and explaining their feeding habits with the confidence of someone who'd watched too many documentaries. Isabella, to her credit, engaged with genuine interest, asking questions that made Lila light up even more. Ethan watched them from the kitchen, washing dishes and trying to process the strangeness of it all. This woman who commanded boardrooms and made executives sweat was sitting at his cheap kitchen table, nodding seriously while his daughter explained why the Brachiosaurus was actually the coolest dinosaur despite being herbivorous. When breakfast ended, Isabella checked her phone and frowned. I should go. I need to get back to the office and figure out my housing situation. The fumigation's not done? Ethan asked. Not for another 2 days, apparently. They found more damage than expected. She stood, smoothing her wrinkled blouse in a gesture that seemed more habitual than effective. I'll find a hotel further out if I have to. Or, Ethan said, and he knew he was being stupid again, you could stay here until your place is ready. Isabella stared at him. Ethan, I know how it sounds, but you saw how easy that was. We have space, Lila clearly doesn't mind, and it's better than paying for some random hotel 40 minutes away. Just think about it. That's insane. You said that last night too. Then you stayed anyway. She looked like she was about to argue, but Lila interrupted, tugging on Isabella's sleeve. Will you come back? Isabella crouched down to Lila's level, and Ethan saw something in her expression crack open. Would you like that? Yeah, you didn't finish telling me about velociraptors, and Dad's usually boring at breakfast. I am not boring, Ethan protested. You talk about work stuff. That's boring. Isabella laughed, and it was that real laugh again, the one that didn't sound like it came from a corporate strategy. I'll come back, she promised. Is that okay with your dad? Lila looked at Ethan expectantly. He sighed, knowing he was in too deep to back out now. Yeah, it's okay. Isabella stood, meeting his eyes. I'll contribute. Groceries, utilities, whatever you need. You don't have to… Yes, I do. If I'm going to do this, we do it right. Fine. But you're cooking dinner at least once. I'm curious if billionaires know how to work a stove. I'll have you know I make excellent pasta. We'll see about that. She left for the office with a promise to return that evening, and Ethan spent the rest of the morning in a daze, helping Lila with her weekend homework and trying not to think too hard about what he'd just agreed to. His phone buzzed with messages from work, minor emergencies that weren't really emergencies, people panicking about things that could wait until Monday, and he handled them on autopilot. By evening, when Isabella showed up at his door with a suitcase and a bag of groceries, it still didn't feel real. But she walked in like she'd been doing it for years, set her things down, and asked where he kept the pasta pot. Dinner was surprisingly normal. Isabella did, in fact, know how to make pasta, a carbonara that was better than anything Ethan had managed in the last 3 years. Lila declared it really good for adult food and proceeded to tell Isabella approximately 47 facts about Triceratops while they ate. After dinner, after Lila was tucked into bed with her stuffed brontosaurus and a promise of more dinosaur discussions tomorrow, Ethan and Isabella sat on the couch with the kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving a day that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. "This is weird, right?" Ethan said. "I'm not imagining how weird this is." "It's completely weird," Isabella agreed. "I've done hostile takeovers that felt more normal than this. So why are we doing it?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Because I can't remember the last time anything felt real. My life is all strategy and performance and making sure I'm always 3 steps ahead. But today, eating pasta with your daughter while she explained dinosaur hierarchies, that felt real. I didn't have to be anything except present." Ethan understood that more than he wanted to admit. Lila has that effect. She doesn't care about impressive. She just cares about whether you're paying attention. Must be nice, being a kid. Sometimes. Other times it's all big emotions and no vocabulary to handle them. Kind of like being an adult, actually. Isabella smiled. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only happens between people who are too tired to maintain pretense. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime symphony, sirens, voices, the distant thrum of traffic. Inside, it was quiet and warm and strange. "I should let you sleep," Ethan said eventually. "Tomorrow's going to be chaotic. Lila has soccer in the morning. Can I come?" He looked at her surprised. "To soccer? Why not? Unless you'd rather I didn't." "No, it's fine. Just didn't think you'd want to spend your Sunday watching 7-year-olds chase a ball around a field. I've sat through longer board meetings about less interesting things." "Fair enough." He got up, stretched, and headed toward his room. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. Isabella was already arranging her blanket, settling into the couch like it was something she'd been doing forever. "Thanks," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not making this more complicated than it has to be." She looked at him, and in the dim light of the apartment, she looked younger, softer, more like someone he could actually know rather than someone he worked for. "Thank you for throwing me that stupid rope." He grinned. "Any time." In his room, lying in the dark, Ethan stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell happened next. This couldn't last. He knew that. Eventually, Isabella's penthouse would be ready, she'd go back to her world, and his life would return to its normal rhythm. But for now, for these strange suspended days, something different was happening. Something that felt dangerously close to mattering, and that more than anything was what scared him. Sunday morning arrived with Lila jumping on Ethan's bed at exactly 6:15, which meant she'd actually slept in for once. He groaned, pulled the pillow over his head, and tried to remember why he'd thought having a kid was a good idea. "Dad, Dad, 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 Lila. Soccer's in 2 hours and I need breakfast and my shin guards are missing and Isabella said she's coming and I need to look cool." Ethan cracked one eye open. "You're 7. You're automatically cool. That's not how it works." He dragged himself out of bed and found Isabella already awake in the kitchen, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt he'd never seen her in before. She looked almost unrecognizable without the corporate armor, younger and somehow more present. "Morning," she said, pouring coffee like she'd been doing it in his kitchen for years instead of 2 days. "You didn't have to get up. Habit. I don't really sleep past 6 anymore." She handed him a mug. Lila's been explaining the strategic importance of shin guards for the last 10 minutes. "They're really important," Lila insisted from the living room, where she was tearing through a pile of sports equipment. "Last week, Emma got kicked, and she cried for like 5 whole minutes." "Sounds traumatic," Isabella said seriously. "It was. There was blood and everything." Ethan drank his coffee and watched Isabella interact with his daughter, still trying to reconcile the woman who terrified him in quarterly reviews with the person currently discussing the dangers of youth soccer injuries. It didn't compute, but somehow it worked. They made it to the field with 10 minutes to spare, which was a personal record. Lila ran off to join her team, a chaotic group of 7-year-olds in mismatched uniforms who seemed more interested in picking grass than actual soccer. Ethan and Isabella found a spot on the sidelines, sitting on a blanket that had seen better days. I have no idea what's happening, Isabella admitted after the first few minutes of play. Neither do they, Ethan said, watching as 3 kids on Lila's team all ran after the ball at once, crashed into each other, and fell over. The rules are more like suggestions at this age. That's one way to play. They sat in companionable silence, watching the game unfold in its beautifully disorganized way. Other parents dotted the sidelines, most of them looking as tired as Ethan felt. A few gave him curious glances. He wasn't usually here with anyone, but no one approached. Does Lila play any other sports? Isabella asked. She tried basketball last year, hated it, said the ball was too bouncy. That's literally the point of basketball. Try explaining that to a 6-year-old. Isabella laughed, and Ethan realized he was starting to recognize the different types of her laugh. The polished one she used in meetings, the surprised one that came out when Lila said something unexpected, and this one, the easy one that suggested she was actually relaxed. Lila scored a goal, mostly by accident, after the ball ricocheted off her knee, and both Ethan and Isabella jumped up to cheer. Lila beamed at them from across the field, and Ethan felt something in his chest tighten in that way it did when his daughter was purely, unselfconsciously happy. After the game, they stopped for ice cream despite it being 10 in the morning, because Lila had deployed the "Emma's mom always gets ice cream after games" argument, and Ethan was too tired to fight it. They sat at a sticky picnic table outside the shop, and Lila talked non-stop about the game, replaying every moment with the intensity of a professional sports analyst. And then when I scored, did you see Marcus's face? He was so mad because he thinks he's the only one who can score, but I showed him... Lila, Ethan interrupted gently. Breathe. She took a dramatic breath, then continued without missing a beat. Anyway, Isabella, did you see when I scored? I did. Very impressive. Dad says I scored by accident, but I think it was skill. Definitely skill, Isabella agreed, shooting Ethan a look that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. They spent the rest of the day doing absolutely nothing important. Grocery shopping, laundry, watching Lila's favorite dinosaur documentary for what had to be the 40th time. It was achingly normal, the kind of day Ethan had lived 100 times before, except now there was someone else moving through it with them, folding towels and offering commentary on Pteranodon wingspan. That evening, after Lila was in bed, Isabella pulled out her laptop and settled at the kitchen table. Ethan was doing dishes when he noticed her frowning at the screen. Work? He asked. Always. She didn't look up. We're in the middle of a major systems integration, and half the documentation is missing. Someone's been sloppy. Ethan dried his hands and came over, professional instinct kicking in despite the domestic setting. Which system? The financial reconciliation platform. The one you manage. Can I see? She turned the laptop toward him, and he scanned through the error logs, his frown deepening. Something wasn't right. The errors were too consistent, too patterned. It looked less like sloppiness and more like deliberate interference, but that didn't make sense. This is weird, he said slowly. Weird how? These errors, they're not random. Look at the timestamps. They're happening at exact intervals, always targeting the same data streams. That's not a bug. That's design. Isabella's expression sharpened. You think someone's manipulating the system? I don't know. Maybe. But if they are, they're being careful about it. This would take serious access and technical knowledge. She closed the laptop, her jaw tight. I need to look into this tomorrow, quietly. Want me to help? You already have enough on your plate. Isabella, I manage operations. This is literally my job. She met his eyes, and he saw the calculation happening, whether to trust him, whether to pull him deeper into whatever this was becoming. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but carefully. If someone's doing this deliberately, we can't tip them off. The week that followed developed its own rhythm, strange but surprisingly functional. Isabella left for work early. She was still the CEO, after all, with board meetings and investor calls and 1,000 decisions that couldn't wait. But she came back in the evenings, usually around the time Ethan was picking Lila up from school, and they'd all have dinner together like some kind of accidentally assembled family. Lila adapted to Isabella's presence with the easy acceptance of childhood. Within 3 days, she was saving a seat for Isabella at dinner, asking her opinion on homework assignments, and informing her friends that she had a temporary grown-up roommate who knows about velociraptors. Ethan was less adaptable. He kept waiting for the arrangement to crack, for Isabella to realize how far she'd strayed from her normal life, for the inherent absurdity of the situation to catch up with them. But it didn't happen. Instead, Isabella integrated herself into their routines with surprising grace, helping with dishes, reading to Lila before bed, leaving post-it notes on the coffee maker with terrible jokes that made Ethan laugh despite himself. At work, they maintained careful professionalism. Ethan didn't mention that his CEO was sleeping on his couch, and Isabella didn't treat him any differently than she had before. But he started noticing things he'd missed before: the tension in her shoulders during board meetings, the way certain executives spoke to her with barely concealed condescension, the subtle undermining that happened in conference rooms when they thought she wasn't paying attention. He also noticed Damien Voss. Damien was Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, a smooth-talking executive who'd been with the company for 8 years. He was the kind of man who wore expensive suits and spoke in corporate jargon that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Ethan had always found him vaguely irritating but harmless. Now, watching more carefully, he saw something else. Damien had his fingerprints on everything, every major decision, every financial report, every strategic pivot, and he was always there, hovering at Isabella's elbow, offering advice with a smile that never reached his eyes. On Wednesday, Ethan was working late in the server room when he overheard a conversation in the hallway. Damien's voice, low and intense. "The board's getting restless. They want results, not promises." "She's delivering results?" That was Marcus Chen, the CFO. "For now, but one bad quarter, one missed projection, and they'll turn. We just need to be ready when that happens." Ready how? Ready to provide an alternative. Someone with experience, stability, vision. Someone like you. "I'm just saying we should have contingency plans." Ethan stayed very still, barely breathing. When the voices faded, he sat back, his mind racing. It could have been nothing, just corporate politics, the kind of positioning that happened in every company. But combined with those system errors, those two perfect patterns in the data. He went home that night and found Isabella already there, helping Lila with a math worksheet at the kitchen table. They looked natural together, like they'd been doing this forever instead of less than a week. "We need to talk," Ethan said quietly after Lila went to bed. Isabella looked up from her laptop. "That sounds ominous." "I overheard something today. Damien Voss and Marcus Chen. They were talking about you, about the board, about having contingency plans." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went cold. "What exactly did they say?" He repeated the conversation as accurately as he could. Isabella listened without interrupting, her fingers still on the keyboard but not moving. "Marcus is Damien's ally," she said finally. "Has been for years. They came up through the company together." "Do you trust them?" She laughed, but it was bitter. "I don't trust anyone in that building except my assistant and the IT guy who fixed my computer once without making it weird. Corporate trust is an oxymoron." "You trust me. That's different." "Why?" "Because you have nothing to gain from my success or failure. You're not trying to take my job or build an empire. You're just trying to keep your daughter fed and your systems running." She paused. "That makes you either the most trustworthy person I know or completely naive. Can I be both?" "Apparently." Over the next few days, Ethan started digging deeper into the system logs, working late after Lila was asleep, tracing the patterns he'd noticed earlier. What he found made his stomach drop. The financial discrepancies weren't random. Someone had been systematically manipulating data for months, small changes, almost invisible individually, but together they painted a picture of mismanagement and declining performance. It was subtle, professional, and devastating. And all the changes originated from high-level executive access. He brought his findings to Isabella on Friday night, spreading printouts across the kitchen table after Lila was in bed. She studied them in silence, her expression growing darker with each page. "This is coordinated," she said finally. "Someone's been setting me up. It looks like it's been happening since January. Small adjustments to revenue projections, delayed expense reports, inventory discrepancies that make it look like operations is failing." "Which makes it look like I'm failing." "Yeah." She sat back, running her hands through her hair. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. They're voting on executive performance reviews. If they see data like this, they'll question your leadership. They'll do more than question it. They'll replace me. Ethan had never seen her look scared before. Frustrated, tired, angry, but not scared. It made her seem more human and more vulnerable, and he had the sudden urge to promise her it would be okay, even though he had no idea if that was true. "We need to figure out who's doing this," he said instead. "It's Damien. Has to be. He has the access, the motive, and the connections to pull it off." "Can you prove it?" "Not yet, but I will." The weekend passed in tense planning. Isabella worked constantly, reviewing files, making calls, building a case. Ethan helped where he could, pulling system logs and tracing digital footprints while trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Lila. It was getting harder to separate the worlds, work and home, professional and personal, the careful distance he'd always maintained, and this new reality where Isabella was part of his daughter's bedtime routine. He caught himself watching her sometimes, noticing details he shouldn't, the way she drummed her fingers when she was thinking, the faint scar on her left hand, the softness in her voice when she read to Lila. On Sunday, they took Lila to the park. It was Isabella's last night in the apartment. Her penthouse would be ready tomorrow, and the strange interlude would officially end. Ethan tried not to think about it too hard. Lila ran off to the playground, and they sat on a bench, watching her climb the jungle gym with the fearlessness of someone who'd never experienced real consequence. "She's gonna miss you," Ethan said. "I'll miss her too." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "I'll miss this. All of it. The cramped apartment and constant dinosaur facts. The feeling like I'm part of something real. The last 2 weeks, I've felt more like a person than I have in years." Ethan understood that more than he wanted to admit. "You can still visit. Lila would love that. Would you?" He looked at her, at the way the afternoon light caught her hair, at the openness in her expression that he'd never seen in the office. "Yeah, I would." Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. It wasn't attraction, or not just attraction. It was recognition, the kind that happens when you find someone who understands what you've been carrying alone. "Dad, Isabella, watch this." Lila was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, grinning wildly. They both stood up, moved closer, ready to catch her if she fell. She didn't fall. She never did. But they stayed there anyway, spotted her through her acrobatics, partners in the small act of keeping a child safe. That night, Isabella packed her things while Lila supervised, asking approximately 600 questions about whether Isabella would come back and could they have a sleepover sometime and did her penthouse have a pool. "Yes, probably, and yes," Isabella answered patiently. "Can I come swim in your pool?" "If your dad says it's okay." Lila turned to Ethan with the full force of her pleading eyes. "Dad, can I?" "We'll see." "That means yes," Lila informed Isabella confidently. After Lila was in bed, Ethan walked Isabella to her car. She'd called a driver. Even in jeans and a t-shirt, she was still a billionaire, and the sleek black sedan looked absurdly out of place on his street. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. The couch, the terrible coffee, the dinosaur education." "The coffee's not that bad." "It's pretty bad." "Fair." She hesitated, her hand on the car door. "Ethan, about the data manipulation. I'm going to need your help, officially. Can you work with our IT security team to trace the digital footprints?" "Yeah, of course. It might get complicated. If Damien's really behind this, he's not going to go quietly." "I know. And if it goes public, your name will be attached to it. People will know you're on my side." "Is that a problem?" "It could be. For you." Ethan shrugged. "I've had worse problems. Besides, someone's sabotaging the company. That's my job to fix, regardless of politics." She smiled, and it was that genuine smile again, the one that made her look years younger. "You're kind of terrible at corporate self-preservation." "It's a gift." She got in the car and Ethan watched it pull away, taillights disappearing into the city night. The apartment felt emptier when he went back inside, the couch conspicuously vacant, the living room too quiet. He checked on Lila, still asleep, still clutching her brontosaurus, and then stood in his own room, staring at nothing, trying to figure out when exactly his carefully controlled life had become this complicated. Monday morning brought reality crashing back. At work, Ethan met with Isabella and Leo Park, the head of IT security. Leo was brilliant, paranoid, and the kind of person who treated every system like a potential crime scene. "Show me what you found," Leo said without preamble. Ethan walked him through the data patterns, the timestamps, the access logs. Leo's expression grew increasingly dark. "This is sophisticated," he said finally. "Whoever did this knows our systems inside and out. They covered their tracks, used VPN routing, spoofed access credentials." "But can you trace it?" Isabella asked. "Maybe. Give me 48 hours. Those 48 hours felt like 48 years. Ethan went through the motions at work, managing his team, fixing problems, pretending everything was normal. But he was acutely aware of Damien moving through the office, of the way certain executives clustered in conference rooms, of the tension that seemed to thicken with each passing hour. On Wednesday morning, Leo called them into a secure conference room. He looked like he hadn't slept, which, knowing Leo, he probably hadn't. "I found it," he said, pulling up a screen full of code and access logs. "The manipulation's been running for 7 months. It's elegant, automated scripts that make tiny changes to financial data, buried deep in routine system maintenance. But the origin point is clear." "Who?" Isabella's voice was cold. "Executive access credentials, specifically Marcus Chen's account." Isabella and Ethan exchanged glances. "Marcus is CFO," Isabella said slowly. "He has access to everything financial." "But is he smart enough to code something like this?" Ethan asked. Leo shook his head. "This level of technical sophistication? No. Marcus is a numbers guy, not a programmer. Someone else wrote this and used his credentials to deploy it." "Damien," Isabella said flatly, "can't prove that yet. But I did find something else." Leo pulled up another screen. The scripts weren't just manipulating current data, they were also creating false projections, making it look like company performance would decline over the next 2 quarters. "It's a setup for a takeover bid." "Someone wants me out," Isabella said, "and they want the board to think the company's failing, so they'll vote for new leadership." "That would be my assessment." Ethan felt cold. This wasn't just corporate politics anymore. This was calculated, deliberate, and dangerous. "Can we bring this to the board?" he asked. "Not yet," Isabella said. "We need more proof. If we go in with accusations but can't tie Damien directly to this, we look paranoid and he looks like the stable alternative. So what do we do?" "We set a trap." Over the next week, they built their case carefully. Leo dug deeper into the digital trail, finding fragments of code that matched Damien's known programming style from earlier projects. Ethan worked with his operations team to document every discrepancy, every manipulation, building a timeline that showed the systematic nature of the sabotage. And Isabella played the long game, acting like nothing was wrong, letting Damien think his plan was working. It was exhausting and terrifying, and Ethan found himself texting Isabella late at night, checking in, making sure she was okay. She always responded, usually with dry humor about board politics or questions about what Lila was doing. It was a lifeline for both of them, a reminder that there was something beyond the corporate warfare. Lila noticed the tension. She was 7, not stupid. "Is Isabella okay?" she asked one night at dinner. "What makes you think she's not okay?" "She looks sad when she thinks no one's watching." Ethan put down his fork. "She's dealing with some hard stuff at work." "Like when Marcus yelled at you last month?" "Something like that, but bigger." "Can we help her?" "I'm trying to, sweetheart." Lila considered this seriously. "You should make her dinner. You always feel better after dinner." "That's actually not a bad idea." So that Friday, after a particularly brutal day of pretending everything was fine while building a case against corporate sabotage, Ethan texted Isabella. "Come over tonight. Real dinner, not takeout. Lila's orders." She showed up at 7 with wine and exhaustion in equal measure. Lila hugged her like it had been months instead of days, and Isabella held on just a little too long. Dinner was spaghetti, nothing fancy, but they ate together at the kitchen table, and Lila talked about her week with the intensity of someone who'd been storing up stories. Isabella listened like every word mattered, and Ethan watched them both and felt that dangerous tightness in his chest again. After Lila went to bed, they sat on the couch with wine, and Isabella finally let herself slump. "I'm tired," she said quietly. "I know, not just physically. Tired of fighting, tired of always having to be on guard, tired of wondering who's trying to destroy me this week." "You're allowed to be tired." "Am I?" Because it feels like the moment I show weakness, someone will use it against me. Not here, Ethan said firmly. Here you can just be tired. She looked at him, something vulnerable in her expression. How do you do it? Stay optimistic when everything's hard. I'm not optimistic. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah, optimism is thinking things will get better. Stubbornness is deciding to keep going even when you know they might not. She laughed softly. That's bleak. But honest. They sat in silence, and Ethan was aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth of her shoulder against his, of the way the apartment felt different with her in it. He should have pulled away, maintained distance, kept things professional. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was. The board meeting's in 4 days, Isabella said finally. Are we ready? As ready as we'll ever be. Leo's testimony is solid, the documentation is comprehensive, and we have enough circumstantial evidence to make Damien sweat. But corporate boards don't like drama. Even if we prove Damien's guilty, they might decide the whole situation is too messy and clean house entirely. Including you. Including me. Ethan took her hand without thinking, lacing his fingers through hers. Then we'll deal with that. But you're not going down without a fight. She squeezed his hand. Promise me something. What? If this goes sideways, if I lose everything, don't let it touch you and Lila. Walk away clean. I'll make sure Damien doesn't target you, but you have to promise you'll protect your daughter first. Isabella, promise me, Ethan. He looked at her, at the fierce protectiveness in her eyes, and realized she wasn't just asking him to save himself. She was asking him to prove that something in her world was worth protecting, even if she couldn't be. I promise, he said, but it's not going to come to that. How do you know? Because you're better than him, and sometimes that actually matters. She smiled, sad and tired and grateful. You're naive. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. But she didn't let go of his hand. The weekend before the board meeting was surreal. Isabella stayed over both nights, officially to work on their presentation, but really because none of them wanted to be alone. They fell into the rhythm they'd established before, dinner and dishes and Lila's bedtime routine, except now there was an undercurrent of tension, a ticking clock counting down to Monday. On Sunday night, after Lila was asleep, Isabella and Ethan went over the presentation one more time. Facts, figures, digital forensics, timeline of manipulation. It was airtight, professional, and damning. This is good work, Isabella said finally, closing her laptop. It's the truth. That should count for something. Should, she agreed. Doesn't always. You're scared. Terrified. He reached over and took her hand again, and this time she didn't question it, just held on like he was the only stable thing in a world that wouldn't stop tilting. Whatever happens tomorrow, Ethan said quietly, you're not alone in it. I know, that's what scares me most. Why? Because if I fall, I might take you with me. Then we'll fall together. That's not the worst thing. She looked at him, and something in her expression cracked open. For a moment, he thought she might cry, but Isabella Hart didn't cry, not where anyone could see. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, soft and brief and desperate. When she pulled back, they stared at each other, both breathing hard, both knowing they'd crossed a line neither of them could uncross. That was stupid, she whispered. Yeah. We should pretend it didn't happen. We should. Neither of them moved. Neither of them pretended. I don't know how to do this, Isabella said. Whatever this is, I don't know how to be someone's... I don't even know what word to use. Partner, Ethan suggested. Friend? Person who occasionally crashes on my couch and steals my coffee? She laughed, and it was watery but real. All of the above? Works for me. They sat there in this quiet apartment holding hands like teenagers, and Ethan tried not to think about tomorrow, about board meetings and corporate warfare and the dozen ways this could destroy them both. For now, in this moment, they were just two tired people who'd found something worth holding on to. Monday would come soon enough, and when it did, they'd face it together. Monday morning felt like walking toward a cliff edge knowing the ground would give out, but not knowing when. Ethan dropped Lila off at school earlier than usual, watching her run toward her classroom with her dinosaur backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She turned at the door and waved, completely unaware that her father's world might implode before lunch. He waved back and tried to look normal. At the office, the tension was thick enough to choke on. People moved through the corridors with the nervous energy of animals sensing a storm. Word had spread that today's board meeting was critical, though no one knew exactly why. Ethan saw clusters of executives whispering in corners, watched Damien Voss hold court near the coffee station with his usual entourage of sycophants. Damien looked confident. That was what scared Ethan most. Isabella had arrived before dawn, Leo told him when they met in the secure conference room on the 40th floor. She'd been reviewing documents, rehearsing her presentation, preparing for every possible counterargument. Now she was in her office with the door closed, and Leo advised against disturbing her. She gets like this before big fights, Leo said, adjusting his glasses nervously. Goes quiet, focused, kind of terrifying, actually. Have you double-checked everything? Ethan asked for the third time that morning. Triple-checked. The evidence is solid. The digital trail is clear. We've got timestamps, access logs, code analysis, everything. Unless Damien has a clone we don't know about, there's no way he talks his way out of this. People talk their way out of impossible things all the time. Not helping, Cross. Sorry. They went over the presentation one final time, making sure every slide was perfect, every claim backed by undeniable proof. At 10:30, Isabella emerged from her office looking like she'd put on armor instead of a suit. Her expression was blank, professional, the CEO mask fully in place. Ready? She asked, and her voice betrayed nothing. As will ever be, Leo said. She looked at Ethan, and for just a second, the mask slipped. He saw the fear underneath, the exhaustion, the weight of everything riding on the next 2 hours. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make this easier, but there were no words for what they were walking into. Instead, he just nodded. Let's go end this. The boardroom was on the 45th floor, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The table was an obscene slab of mahogany that could have seated 30, though today only 15 chairs were occupied. Board members filed in with the grim expressions of people expecting bad news, taking their seats with the careful choreography of corporate hierarchy. Damien arrived with Marcus Chen, both of them wearing matching expressions of concerned professionalism. They took seats near the head of the table, close enough to the chairman to suggest alliance, far enough from Isabella to make the division clear. Ethan and Leo sat along the side wall, technically observers but crucial to what was about to happen. Ethan's hands were sweating. He wiped them on his pants and tried to look like someone who attended board meetings regularly, instead of someone whose entire professional life was about to become a battlefield. Chairman Richard Sterling called the meeting to order at 11 sharp. He was 70, silver-haired, and had the kind of presence that came from 40 years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. His expression gave nothing away. We're here to discuss concerns that have been raised regarding company performance and executive leadership, Sterling began, his voice formal and detached. Ms. Hart, you've requested this emergency session. The floor is yours. Isabella stood, and every eye in the room turned to her. She walked to the presentation screen at the front of the room with the controlled grace of someone walking to an execution. Thank you, Chairman Sterling, board members. What I'm about to present is evidence of systematic sabotage that's been occurring within this company for the past 7 months. Someone has been deliberately manipulating our financial data, creating false narratives of declining performance, and setting the stage for a hostile internal takeover. The room erupted in murmurs. Sterling raised his hand for silence. Those are serious accusations, Ms. Hart. I'm aware, and I have serious evidence to support them. She advanced the first slide. Numbers, timestamps, data patterns. Ethan had helped create this presentation, but seeing it displayed for 15 of the most powerful people in the company made his stomach clench. These are system access logs from our financial reconciliation platform, Isabella continued, her voice steady and cold. Notice the pattern of unauthorized changes occurring every Tuesday and Thursday at precisely 2:15 a.m. Small modifications to revenue projections, expense reports, inventory data. Individually, they're almost invisible. Collectively, they paint a picture of a company in decline. Almost invisible? One of the board members, Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, leaned forward. Are you suggesting you only recently discovered this? I'm suggesting someone was very good at hiding it. But yes, we discovered it 2 weeks ago, and we've spent that time building an irrefutable case. Damien spoke up, his tone perfectly calibrated to sound concerned rather than defensive. Isabella, I appreciate your diligence, but this sounds like you're looking for excuses for actual performance issues. Sometimes numbers decline because the business is struggling, not because of conspiracy theories. Is that what you'd like the board to believe? Isabella's voice could have cut glass. That our systems spontaneously started reporting false data? That 7 months of doctored financial reports is just coincidence? I'm saying perhaps we should consider the simpler explanation before jumping to corporate espionage. The simpler explanation is exactly what we discovered. She advanced to the next slide. These modifications all originated from executive-level access credentials, specifically credentials belonging to Marcus Chen. The room went dead silent. All eyes turned to Marcus, who'd gone pale. That's impossible, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. My credentials are secure. If someone used them, they were stolen. Interesting theory, Leo spoke up from his position along the wall. Except the access logs show these changes were made from your computer, in your office, using your physical security keycard to enter the building. Then someone cloned my access. Also interesting, since our security system would have flagged duplicate credential use. It didn't, which means either you made these changes yourself, or someone with intimate knowledge of both your security protocols and our company systems used your identity perfectly. Damien jumped in, smooth as ever. This is starting to sound like a witch hunt. Marcus is CFO. Of course, financial changes come from his credentials. That's his job. His job doesn't include falsifying projections and manipulating audit trails, Isabella shot back. And here's where it gets interesting. She advanced several slides rapidly, showing complex code and system architecture. The manipulation wasn't manual. Someone wrote automated scripts to make these changes, buried deep in our system maintenance protocols. Scripts that required advanced programming knowledge and intimate familiarity with our infrastructure. She paused, letting that sink in. Marcus, when was the last time you wrote code? Marcus looked like a trapped animal. I'm not a programmer. Exactly. But someone is. Isabella advanced to another slide showing code analysis. Leo, explain what we found. Leo stood, pushing his glasses up nervously, but speaking with the confidence of someone discussing his expertise. This code has distinctive patterns, variable naming conventions, commenting style, error handling approaches. We compared it to historical projects in our company repository. The programming style matches exactly with code written by Damien Voss during his tenure as head of systems development 5 years ago. Every head in the room swiveled to Damien. His expression remained calm, but Ethan saw his jaw tighten. That's circumstantial at best, Damien said. Programming styles can be replicated. Anyone could have mimicked my approach. Could they also replicate your personal debugging signatures? Leo pulled up another screen. These comments buried in the code. They reference inside jokes from the 2019 development team. Jokes that only 3 people in this company would understand, and 2 of them no longer work here. You're the third. The board members were leaning forward now, interested and alarmed in equal measure. Sterling's expression had shifted from neutral to intensely focused. Mr. Voss, Sterling said slowly, do you have an explanation for this? Damien spread his hands in a gesture of reasonable cooperation. Richard, this is clearly a setup. Isabella feels threatened by normal corporate oversight, so she's constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory using technical jargon most of us don't understand. She's grasping at straws because her actual performance has been declining. My performance, Isabella said, her voice dangerously quiet, has been declining because you've been systematically destroying the data that proves otherwise. But we found the original records. She advanced to a new set of slides showing side-by-side comparisons, falsified reports versus recovered original data. The differences were stark. Where the manipulated data showed declining revenue and increasing costs, the originals showed steady growth and efficient operations. These are the real numbers, Isabella continued, recovered from system backups before they could be corrupted. Our company is not failing, but someone wanted you to think it was. Why? Sarah Chen asked. What's the motive? Isabella looked directly at Damien. Control. Remove me, install someone more cooperative, and whoever's behind this gets to run Vanguard systems without the inconvenience of a CEO who asks difficult questions. You're paranoid, Damien said, but there was an edge in his voice now. Am I? Then explain the external communication. Isabella pulled up email records. We subpoenaed Marcus's personal email account, legally, with proper authorization. These messages show regular communication with Kepler and Associates, a corporate law firm specializing in hostile takeovers. Discussions about board composition, shareholder sentiment, optimal timing for executive changes. Marcus stood up abruptly. I was consulting them for personal advice that included detailed analysis of how to remove a sitting CEO and install new leadership. Personal advice that coincided exactly with the timeline of data manipulation. Sit down, Mr. Chen, Sterling said, his voice hard. Marcus sat. The chairman turned to Damien. Mr. Voss, this evidence is substantial. Do you have any response beyond denial? Damien's mask was cracking now. Ethan could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The realization that his carefully constructed plan was falling apart in real time. This is a coup, Damien said finally, his voice tight. Isabella knows she's losing control, so she's manufacturing evidence to eliminate her rivals. You're watching her destroy two long-serving executives based on circumstantial technical data that could have been fabricated by anyone with IT access, including your own IT head? Sterling gestured to Leo. Who you personally hired 4 years ago. People can be compromised. Or they can be telling the truth. Sterling looked at the other board members. I think we need to hear from Mr. Cross. Ethan's heart stopped. He hadn't been expecting to speak. That was Isabella and Leo's role. But now every face in the room was turned toward him, waiting. He stood on legs that felt unsteady. I manage operations. Financial reconciliation falls under my department. I was the first person to notice the anomalies in the system. And what made you notice them? One of the board members asked. They were too perfect. Real errors are messy, random, human. These were precise, patterned, deliberate. It looked less like mistakes and more like someone trying to paint a specific picture. Did Ms. Hart direct you to look for this? No. I found it by accident during routine maintenance. I brought it to her attention because it was my job to report system irregularities. And you have no personal stake in Ms. Hart's leadership? Ethan hesitated. This was the question that could destroy everything. If he lied and someone found out about Isabella staying at his apartment, everything they'd built would collapse. If he told the truth, they'd assume bias and dismiss the evidence. He decided on something in between. I want this company to succeed, he said carefully. That means having leadership that isn't being sabotaged from within. Whether that's Ms. Hart or someone else isn't my concern. The sabotage itself is. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Sterling studied him with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades reading people in high-stakes situations. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Ethan sat down, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. Isabella caught his eye briefly, and he saw gratitude there, mixed with something that looked like regret. The board debated for what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes. Damien tried several more times to redirect the conversation, to cast doubt on the evidence, to position himself as the stable alternative to Isabella's paranoid leadership. But the digital trail was too clear, the pattern too obvious, the coincidences too numerous to dismiss. Finally, Sterling called for order. Based on the evidence presented, I'm calling for an immediate suspension of both Mr. Voss and Mr. Chen pending full investigation. All executive privileges are revoked effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Richard, this is insane, Damien started. It's procedure. If the investigation clears you, you'll be reinstated with full apologies. If it doesn't, Sterling left the implication hanging. 2 security officers appeared at the boardroom door as if they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Probably they had been. Marcus went quietly, looking like he might be sick. Damien stood slowly, his expression murderous. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at Isabella. Yes, she replied coldly. It is. They watched Damien and Marcus leave under guard, the heavy boardroom door closing behind them with a finality that felt like the end of something larger than just a meeting. Sterling turned back to Isabella. Ms. Hart, the board appreciates your diligence in uncovering this situation. However, We'll need to conduct our own independent audit to verify these findings. Of course. And we'll need to discuss why it took 7 months to discover this manipulation. Questions will be raised about oversight. I understand. For now, you retain your position and the board's conditional confidence. But understand that confidence will need to be rebuilt, slowly. It wasn't a victory. Not really. It was survival, which sometimes was the same thing but usually wasn't. Isabella nodded, accepting the terms because she had no choice. The board members filed out, some stopping to shake Isabella's hand, others leaving without acknowledgement. Within 10 minutes, the massive boardroom was empty except for Isabella, Ethan, and Leo. The silence was deafening. "Did we just win?" Leo asked finally. "We just didn't lose," Isabella corrected. "There's a difference." She walked to the window and stared out at the city, her shoulders tight with tension that hadn't been allowed to show during the meeting. Ethan approached carefully, aware that Leo was still in the room, but not caring as much as he probably should. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it. I couldn't have found this without you. I just followed the data." "You followed the data and risked your career to bring it to me. That's not nothing." Leo cleared his throat. "I'm going to go make sure security actually removes their system access and doesn't just escort them to different offices. Corporate security has been known to screw that up." He left, and then it was just the two of them in the enormous boardroom, standing by the windows with the city spread out below them like something conquerable. "I need a drink," Isabella said. "It's 1 in the afternoon. I need a drink anyway." "Fair enough." They stood there for a long moment, neither moving, both processing what had just happened. Ethan could feel the adrenaline starting to drain from his system, leaving behind exhaustion and the beginning of what might eventually be relief. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait for the investigation. It'll take weeks, maybe months. They'll tear apart every file, every transaction, every communication. And if they find anything that contradicts what we presented, they won't, because we told the truth. Truth doesn't always win, Ethan." "It did today." She turned to look at him, and her expression was complicated, gratitude and fear, and something else he couldn't quite name. "I kissed you last night. I remember. That was stupid. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. I'm your boss. You're my employee. This is every HR nightmare rolled into one terrible decision. So what do you want to do about it?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked back out the window. "I don't know. I don't know how to do this. Any of this. I've spent my entire adult life building walls, and you just walked through them like they weren't even there. Maybe they weren't as solid as you thought. Or maybe you're just reckless. Also possible." She almost smiled. "I have to go deal with the aftermath of this. Press releases, damage control, reassuring investors that we're not imploding. Want company? I want to not have to be CEO for 5 minutes, but that's not an option. It could be, later, after the fires are out and the crisis is managed. And then what? We have dinner at your apartment and pretend that everything's normal? Would that be so bad?" She looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw the war happening behind her eyes, between what she wanted and what she thought she was allowed to want, between the life she'd built and the one that was suddenly possible. "No," she said finally. "It wouldn't be bad at all. That's what terrifies me." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and felt his stomach drop. "What?" Isabella asked, reading his expression. "Lila's school. She's sick. I need to pick her up." "Go. I'll handle things here." He hesitated, torn between responsibility to his daughter and wanting to make sure Isabella was okay. She saw the conflict and made the decision for him. "Ethan, go. Your daughter needs you. I'll be fine." "Will you?" Eventually. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture so quick anyone watching wouldn't have noticed. "Thank you for everything." He wanted to kiss her again, wanted to promise that things would be okay, wanted to do any of a dozen things that were inappropriate in a corporate boardroom after what had just happened. Instead, he just nodded and left. The drive to Lila's school felt surreal, like moving between worlds that shouldn't exist in the same universe. 20 minutes ago, he'd been watching corporate saboteurs removed under guard. Now he was parking in a school pickup lane behind a minivan with stick-figure family decals. Lila was in the nurse's office, looking miserable, her face flushed with fever. She perked up a little when she saw him. "Dad? Hey, sweetheart. Not feeling good? My tummy hurts and my head hurts and everything's awful. Let's get you home." He signed her out and carried her to the car, her head heavy against his shoulder. On the drive home, she dozed fitfully, occasionally waking to complain about how terrible she felt. Ethan made soothing noises and tried not to think about everything that had just happened at work. At home, he got Lila settled on the couch with her favorite blanket and her stuffed brontosaurus. She was running a fever, not dangerous, but enough to make her uncomfortable. He gave her medicine, made her drink water, and put on her favorite dinosaur documentary at low volume. "Is Isabella coming over?" Lila asked between sips of water. "I don't know, sweetheart. She's dealing with some complicated work stuff." "I miss her." "Yeah, me too." "Are you dating her?" The question caught him completely off guard. "What? No, why would you?" "Emma says when adults have sleepovers and hold hands, they're dating. You and Isabella held hands at the park." Ethan closed his eyes. He'd forgotten that 7-year-olds noticed everything and understood more than they should. "It's complicated, Lila." "That's what adults say when the answer is yes, but they don't want to admit it." "When did you get so smart?" "I was born smart. You just didn't notice." He couldn't help but laugh, even though the conversation was veering into territory he wasn't ready to navigate. "How about we focus on you feeling better, and we can talk about complicated adult stuff later?" "Fine, but I think you should date her. She's nice, and she knows about dinosaurs, and she doesn't try to make you eat vegetables disguised as other food." "I do not disguise vegetables." "Dad, I know when there's zucchini in the pasta sauce." "That's just being a good father." "It's being a sneaky father." She dozed off mid-argument, her fever medicine kicking in. Ethan sat on the floor next to the couch, one hand resting on her leg, and let himself process everything that had happened. They'd done it. They'd exposed Damien and Marcus, protected Isabella's position, and survived. But survival came with costs. Questions about oversight, damaged board relationships, and the knowledge that corporate wars didn't end cleanly. Damien and Marcus would fight back, hire lawyers, try to flip the narrative. It would get uglier before it got better. And underneath all of that was the impossible question of what happened next with Isabella. They'd crossed lines that probably shouldn't have been crossed, and now they had to figure out what that meant in a world where she was still his CEO and he was still her operations manager, and every interaction would be scrutinized. His phone buzzed, a text from Isabella. "How's Lila?" "Fever, homesick. She misses you." "Just her?" Ethan stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "No, not just her." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I'm coming over after work, if that's okay." "It's okay. I'll bring soup, the good kind, not whatever college students eat." "We're not that desperate. Your last text mentioned eating cereal for dinner 3 times in 1 week. That was a challenging week. Hence the soup." He smiled despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the uncertainty and the knowledge that they were stumbling into something neither of them knew how to handle. But maybe that was okay. Maybe stumbling was how people figured out where they were actually trying to go. Lila woke up around 5, still feverish but slightly more alert. She drank more water, ate half a piece of toast, and announced that being sick was boring. "Welcome to the worst part of being sick," Ethan said. "Can we watch something that's not dinosaurs?" "Who are you and what have you done with my daughter?" "Dad, I'm serious. I've seen this documentary 17 times. "That sounds like a personal problem." She threw her stuffed brontosaurus at him. He caught it and returned it to her, settling in on the couch beside her. They were halfway through a movie about talking animals when someone knocked on the door. Lila perked up immediately. "Is that Isabella?" "Probably. I look terrible. She can't see me like this." "You're 7 and sick. You're allowed to look terrible." "That's not how it works, Dad." But before she could protest further, Ethan opened the door. Isabella stood there in jeans and a sweater, holding 2 bags of takeout and looking more exhausted than Ethan had ever seen her. "Hey," she said. "Hey." They stood there for a moment, neither moving, both aware that something fundamental had shifted and neither knowing quite how to acknowledge it. "I brought soup," Isabella said finally, "and also Thai food because I wasn't sure soup was enough." "It's definitely enough." "Isabella," Lila called from the couch. I'm sick, but I don't look terrible, even though Dad says I do. You look perfectly sick, Isabella assured her, coming inside, which is exactly how you should look when you're sick. She set the food down and went straight to Lila, checking her forehead with the back of her hand in that instinctive way that people who care about kids do. Ethan watched from the kitchen, something warm and complicated settling in his chest. They ate together on the living room floor, Lila wrapped in blankets between them, picking at her soup while Isabella and Ethan tackled the Thai food. The movie played in the background, but none of them were really watching it. Did you save the company? Lila asked Isabella between spoonfuls. Sort of. That's good. Dad was worried. Lila, Ethan warned. What? You were. You kept checking your phone and making that face you make when you're worried but pretending you're not. I don't have a worried face. You definitely have a worried face, Isabella agreed. Great. Now you're both ganging up on me. We're just being honest, Lila said primly. After dinner, Lila's fever medicine wore off and she became clingy and cranky in the way sick kids do. Isabella helped Ethan get her to bed, reading 3 chapters of her current dinosaur book in different character voices that made Lila giggle despite feeling awful. When they finally emerged from Lila's room, it was past 8 and both of them were drained. Thank you, Ethan said. You didn't have to come over after the day you had. I wanted to, needed to, actually. Isabella sank onto the couch. That boardroom felt like a cage. This feels like breathing. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. How bad was the aftermath? Could have been worse. The board's calling it a narrow escape and patting themselves on the back for decisive action. The press release frames it as proactive leadership identifying internal issues. Damien and Marcus have been suspended pending investigation, and their lawyers are already circling. So it's not over. It's never over. But we won today's battle. That counts for something. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that had become familiar between them, comfortable and heavy with things unsaid. Lila asked me if we were dating, Ethan said finally. Isabella tensed beside him. What did you tell her? That it was complicated. Accurate. She said that's what adults say when the answer is yes, but they don't want to admit it. She's not wrong. Ethan turned to look at her. So what's the answer? Are we dating? I don't know. What does dating even mean when you're 38 and running a company and everything's already impossibly messy? It means wanting to see each other, caring what happens, being willing to figure out the messy parts together. That sounds exhausting. It probably is. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that felt more intimate than anything that had happened in the boardroom. I'm not good at this. Relationships, letting people in, all of it. Neither am I. I've been a single father for 3 years because the last person I let in decided we weren't worth staying for. I'm not her. I know. But I'm also not promising I won't screw this up. I probably will, multiple times. That's okay. I'll probably screw it up too. So we're just going to stumble through this together? Unless you have a better plan. She lifted her head to look at him, and her expression was open in a way he'd never seen before, vulnerable and determined and scared all at once. No, I don't have a better plan. This time when they kissed, it wasn't desperate or stolen or overshadowed by crisis. It was deliberate and slow and felt like a promise neither of them was sure they could keep, but were willing to try anyway. When they finally pulled apart, Isabella was almost smiling. This is still stupid. Probably. People at work will talk. Definitely. Lila will have opinions. So many opinions. And we have no idea if this will actually work. Nope. So why does it feel like the first smart thing I've done in years? Ethan kissed her forehead. Because maybe sometimes stupid and smart are the same thing. You just can't tell the difference until after. She laughed quietly. That's terrible logic. It's all I've got. They stayed on the couch until nearly midnight, talking about nothing and everything. About Lila's dinosaur obsession, about Isabella's first job out of college, about what they'd both given up to get where they were, and whether it had been worth it. It felt like the beginning of something real, something that existed outside corporate warfare and crisis management, and all the reasons it shouldn't work. When Isabella finally left, Ethan stood in the doorway and watched her drive away, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe the future wasn't just about surviving one day at a time. Maybe it was about building something worth staying for. The investigation took 3 weeks to complete, and those 3 weeks felt like living in suspended animation. The board brought in external auditors, forensic accountants, and digital security experts who tore through every file, every transaction, every line of code. Ethan spent hours in conference rooms answering the same questions in slightly different ways, walking investigators through system logs and access patterns until the words stopped meaning anything. Isabella was under even more scrutiny. Every decision she'd made in the past year was examined, questioned, and analyzed for evidence of either conspiracy or incompetence. The investigators were professional and polite, but their questions had edges that cut deep. Through it all, they maintained careful distance at work. No personal conversations in hallways, no lingering looks in meetings, nothing that would give anyone ammunition. It was exhausting and necessary, and made Ethan feel like he was living two completely different lives. At home, things were different. Isabella came over most evenings after Lila was out of school, and they'd fallen into a routine that felt dangerously close to normal. Dinner around the kitchen table with Lila dominating the conversation. Homework help that Isabella provided with surprising patience. Bedtime stories that they took turns reading. And after Lila was asleep, they'd sit together on the couch and talk about everything except work, building something that existed entirely separate from the corporate battlefield. Lila had adjusted to Isabella's presence with the easy acceptance of a child who'd never known stability to be guaranteed. She stopped asking when Isabella was coming over and started assuming she would be, setting 3 places at dinner without being asked, saving drawings to show her, incorporating her into the fabric of their small family like she'd always been there. It should have felt rushed, too fast, reckless. Instead, it felt like something clicking into place that had been misaligned for years. But reality had a way of intruding on comfortable illusions. On a Thursday afternoon, 2.5 weeks into the investigation, Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Cross?" A woman's voice, professional and cool. "Speaking. This is Jennifer Walsh from Kepler and Associates. I represent Damian Voss and Marcus Chen. I'd like to discuss your testimony in the ongoing investigation." Ethan's blood went cold. "I don't think I should be talking to you. I understand your hesitation, but I'm not asking you to change your story. I'm simply trying to understand the full context of what happened. My clients maintain they were framed, and I believe you might have information that supports that theory. I gave my testimony to the investigators. That's all I have to say. Mr. Cross, I've done some research on you. Single father, modest income, no significant savings. The kind of person who might be vulnerable to pressure from someone in a position of power. Someone like Isabella Hart." "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that Ms. Hart has a history of eliminating threats to her authority. I'm implying that she may have manipulated evidence and convinced you to support her narrative. And I'm implying that when this comes to light, you'll be caught in the crossfire unless you're willing to reconsider your position. My position is based on evidence. Digital forensics, system logs, code analysis, facts, not narratives. Facts can be manipulated, Mr. Cross, especially by someone with the resources and motivation that Miss Hart possesses. Think carefully about whose side you want to be on when this investigation concludes. My clients are prepared to be very generous to witnesses who help establish the truth." The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He sat there staring at his phone, anger and anxiety warring in his chest. This was it. The counterattack he'd known was coming. Damian and Marcus weren't going down quietly. They were going to fight, and they were going to use every weapon they had. He called Isabella immediately. "Damian's lawyer just contacted me," he said without preamble. "Tried to get me to change my testimony, implied you'd manipulated evidence and that I'd be caught in the crossfire if I didn't switch sides." Isabella was quiet for a long moment. "What did you tell her?" "That my testimony was based on facts and I had nothing more to say." "Good. Don't engage with them again. Forward any other contact attempts to the company's legal team. Isabella, they're coming after you hard. If they can't discredit the evidence, they'll try to discredit us." "I know. It's what I'd do in their position." Her voice was tired. "Are you having second thoughts? About the investigation? No. The evidence is solid." "That's not what I meant." Ethan understood what she was asking. "No second thoughts about us either. But we need to be prepared for this to get uglier." "It's already ugly. It's going to get worse." She was right. Over the next few days, articles started appearing in business publications. Carefully worded pieces that didn't directly accuse Isabella of wrongdoing, but raised questions about her leadership style, her decision-making, her relationships with subordinates. Nothing explicit enough to be actionable, but damaging nonetheless. The worst one appeared in a prominent tech industry blog. The headline read, "Vanguard Systems CEO's questionable judgment. Investigation reveals conflicts of interest." The article didn't name Ethan specifically, but it referenced inappropriate relationships between executive leadership and lower-level employees and suggested that the investigation into Damien and Marcus was motivated by personal vendettas rather than genuine concern for the company. Ethan read it on his phone during lunch break and felt sick. They'd been careful, hadn't they? They'd maintained distance at work, kept things professional. How had anyone found out? The answer came that evening when he got home and found Isabella already there, sitting at his kitchen table with Lila doing homework. Her expression told him she'd seen the article too. "Lila, sweetheart, why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" Ethan said, trying to keep his voice normal. "But I'm not done with math." "You can finish it after dinner. Go on." Lila looked between them, her 7-year-old instincts picking up on the tension. She gathered her books without further protest and disappeared down the hall. "They know," Isabella said flatly once Lila was gone. "How?" "Does it matter? Someone saw us together outside of work. Someone talked. Someone put pieces together that we thought were separate." She rubbed her face with both hands. "I should have been more careful. We were careful. Not careful enough. And now they're using it against me. Against us." She looked up at him, and there was fear in her eyes. "Ethan, this could destroy your career. If they make this look like I was manipulating you, using our relationship to manufacture evidence against my rivals, that's not what happened." "Doesn't matter. It's what they'll say happened. And some people will believe it because it's easier than accepting that executives they've worked with for years are capable of betrayal." Ethan sat down across from her, taking her hands. "So what do we do?" "I don't know. The honest answer is, I don't know. We can deny it, but that makes us look like we're hiding something. We can admit it, but that validates their narrative about conflicts of interest. Or we can just tell the truth, that we met under unusual circumstances, that a relationship developed, but that it had nothing to do with the investigation or the evidence we found. The truth sounds naive when you say it out loud. Maybe, but it's all we have." They sat there in the quiet kitchen, holding hands across homework papers and the debris of Lila's school day, and tried to figure out how to navigate something neither of them had experience with. "I need to tell you something," Isabella said finally, "before this gets worse, and you don't hear it from me first." "Okay?" "There was someone, before you, years ago, when I was still climbing the ladder, another executive, someone with power and influence. We had a relationship, and when it ended badly, he made sure everyone knew I'd slept my way into consideration for promotions I'd actually earned." Ethan's hands tightened on hers. "What happened?" "I survived. Barely. Had to work twice as hard, prove myself 3 times over, endure endless whispers and sideways looks. Eventually, I outlasted him, and everyone forgot. But it taught me that relationships in this world are weapons that will be used against you the moment they're convenient. I'm not him. I know, but they'll make you look like him. They'll make me look like someone who uses people and discards them when they're no longer useful, and you'll get caught in that blast radius. Then we fight back, together. That's easy to say now. Wait until your name is in the articles. Wait until people at work start treating you differently. Wait until it affects Lila." The mention of his daughter made Ethan pause. He hadn't thought about how this might touch her. Playground rumors from other parents, questions she wouldn't know how to answer, the confused hurt of watching adults make her world complicated. "We protect her," he said firmly. "Whatever else happens, we make sure Lila's okay. And if protecting her means walking away from this, from us?" It was the question Ethan had been avoiding since that lawyer called. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to step back, create distance, let Isabella handle her corporate war while he focused on his daughter. It was what any reasonable parent would do, but he'd never been particularly good at the smart thing. "Then we cross that bridge when we get to it," he said, "but we're not there yet." Isabella looked at him like she was trying to memorize his face, like she was already preparing for the possibility that this was temporary. You're too good for this world, you know that? Pretty sure I'm just stubborn. That too. Lila emerged from her room then, apparently tired of being patient, and the conversation had to shift back to homework and dinner plans, and whether watching a dinosaur documentary for the 18th time counted as educational television. The evening proceeded with forced normalcy, but Ethan caught Isabella watching him throughout dinner with an expression that made his chest tight. After Lila was in bed, after Isabella had left with a kiss that felt more like goodbye than goodnight, Ethan sat alone in the dark apartment and tried to figure out what he was willing to risk for something that had started as an impulsive offer to let a stranger crash on his couch. The answer scared him more than the question. The investigation concluded on a Tuesday morning with a conference call to the full board. Ethan wasn't included. He wasn't important enough for that level of corporate theater, but Isabella texted him updates between sessions. Evidence confirmed. Timeline verified. Damien and Marcus's suspension upgraded to termination with cause. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by tension. Victory didn't mean safety, not when the people they'd exposed still had resources and motivation for revenge. The official announcement went out at 2 p.m. Vanguard Systems was terminating Damien Voss and Marcus Chen for gross misconduct, data manipulation, and attempted corporate sabotage. The board extended full confidence in Isabella Hart's leadership and apologized for the disruption to company operations. All pending legal claims would be handled through appropriate channels. It was professional, clean, and gave away nothing about the warfare that had led to this moment. Ethan was in the server room when he got Isabella's next text. Board meeting in my office. 5 minutes. They want to talk about us. His heart stopped. He made it to her office in 3 minutes, taking the stairs because waiting for the elevator felt impossible. Isabella's assistant waved him in without comment, which felt ominous. The office was empty except for Isabella and Richard Sterling. The chairman looked as unreadable as ever, sitting in one of the guest chairs with the casual authority of someone who'd been making difficult decisions since before Ethan was born. "Mr. Cross," Sterling said, "thank you for joining us. Close the door, please." Ethan did, feeling like he was walking into an execution. "I'll be direct," Sterling continued. "The investigation cleared both of you of any wrongdoing related to the data manipulation. Your evidence was solid, your testimony consistent, and the forensic analysis confirmed everything you claimed. Damien and Marcus were guilty, and you helped expose them. The board is grateful." "But," Ethan said, because there was clearly a but coming, "but the matter of your personal relationship is more complicated. The articles, while speculative, have raised questions about judgment and propriety. The board needs to know the nature of that relationship and whether it influenced the investigation in any way." Ethan looked at Isabella. She gave a small nod, permission to be honest. "We met under unusual circumstances," Ethan said carefully. "Ms. Hart needed temporary housing. I offered my couch. And over time, a friendship developed into something more. But that happened after I'd already identified the system irregularities and brought them to her attention. Our relationship didn't influence the investigation. The data did." "When exactly did this relationship begin?" "Romantically, about 2 weeks ago. But she'd been staying at my apartment periodically for a month before that, and we became friends during that time." Sterling looked at Isabella. "Is this accurate?" "Yes. Ethan brought the data anomalies to me before there was anything personal between us. The investigation proceeded based on evidence, not emotion." "And you're both aware that this creates complicated optics for the company?" "We're aware," Isabella said. "We've been trying to manage it appropriately." "By hiding it?" "By keeping it private while we figured out what it was. But clearly, we weren't successful." Sterling was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. Ethan forced himself not to fidget, not to look away, to meet the chairman's gaze like someone who had nothing to hide even though everything felt exposed. "Here's my concern," Sterling said finally. "Isabella, you're the CEO of a major tech company. Ethan, you're a valued operations manager, but several levels below executive leadership. The power dynamic is unavoidable, and it creates liability for the company if this relationship were to end badly." "I understand that," Isabella said. "Do you?" "Because in my experience, people who mix personal and professional lives rarely understand the full implications until it's too late." He leaned back. "I'm not saying you need to end the relationship. I'm saying you need to manage it properly. Formal disclosure to HR, clear boundaries at work, and absolute transparency about any decisions that might involve both of you." That's fair, Ethan said. And if either of you decides this isn't working, you need to handle it like adults. No drama, no retaliation, no making it the company's problem. Agreed. Sterling stood. Good. Then as far as the board is concerned, this matter is closed. Isabella, you've retained your position with our full confidence. Ethan, your work during this investigation was exemplary. But don't make us regret giving you both the benefit of the doubt. He left, and Ethan felt like he could finally breathe again. That went better than expected, Isabella said once they were alone. Did it? Because it felt pretty terrifying. Sterling could have demanded we end things, or that you transfer to a different department. He gave us parameters instead. That's generous, by corporate standards. I guess I'm just not used to my personal life being negotiated in board meetings. She came around the desk and took his hands. Welcome to my world. Everything's a negotiation, even the things that shouldn't be. Sounds exhausting. It is, but maybe less so if I'm not doing it alone. He kissed her forehead. You're not alone, even when Sterling's giving us stern lectures about power dynamics and proper procedures. Speaking of which, we actually do need to file that disclosure with HR. Today? Today. Before someone accuses us of violating policies we're now definitely aware of. They spent the rest of the afternoon dealing with the tedious bureaucracy of officially acknowledging their relationship to the company, forms to sign, meetings with HR to discuss conflict of interest protocols, awkward conversations about appropriate workplace behavior. It was simultaneously necessary and humiliating, reducing something that felt important and real to checkboxes on corporate paperwork. But it also made it official. No more hiding, no more careful distance, no more pretending they were just colleagues who happened to spend time together outside of work. Whatever they were building was now part of the public record, for better or worse. That evening, Ethan picked up Lila from school and braced himself for the conversation he'd been avoiding. So, Isabella and I are dating, he said over dinner, trying to sound casual. Officially, I wanted you to hear it from me. Lila looked up from her chicken nuggets. I already knew that. You, what? Dad, I'm 7, not stupid. You hold hands and look at each other all weird and she's here like every single day. Obviously you're dating. We look at each other weird? Like you're both happy but also scared. It's confusing. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that level of perception from someone who still believed dinosaurs might come back if enough people wished hard enough. Is that okay with you? He asked. That we're dating? Lila considered the question seriously. Will she still come over? Yeah, probably more, actually. Will she still read to me? If you want her to. Will she still know about dinosaurs? I don't think dating changes her dinosaur knowledge. Then it's fine. But Dad? Yeah? Don't mess it up. I like her. I'll do my best, sweetheart. Your best is kind of messy sometimes. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Over the next 2 weeks, life settled into a new pattern. Isabella came over most evenings, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes staying overnight on the couch when work ran late or she was too tired to drive home. The article about their relationship had sparked some gossip at work, but it faded quickly when no dramatic fallout materialized. People had fresh scandals to discuss, and Ethan and Isabella's decidedly boring relationship wasn't interesting enough to sustain attention. Damien and Marcus fought their terminations, of course. Lawyers filed complaints, demanded additional investigations, made threats about wrongful termination suits. But the evidence was too solid, the board too committed to its decision. Eventually, the noise faded to background static. Ethan thought they'd survived the worst of it. He was wrong. The call came on a Thursday evening while Isabella was helping Lila with a science project about erosion. Ethan's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local, so he answered. Mr. Cross, this is Amanda from Brookside Elementary. I'm calling about Lila. His heart jumped into his throat. Is she hurt? No, nothing like that. But there was an incident today during recess. Another student said some unkind things, and Lila got into a physical altercation. A physical... Lila hit someone? She pushed Emma Caldwell. Emma fell and scraped her knee. It's not serious, but we do have a zero-tolerance policy for physical contact, and we need you to come in tomorrow to discuss consequences. Ethan closed his eyes. What were the unkind things the other students said? There was a pause. Emma told several children that Lila's dad was dating his boss to get promoted. She used some language that wasn't appropriate for her age, which suggests she overheard adult conversations. The bottom dropped out of Ethan's stomach. I'll be there tomorrow morning. He hung up and turned to find Isabella and Lila both watching him. Lila's expression was defiant, which meant she knew exactly what the call was about. Lila, can you give us a minute? Ethan said. I'm not sorry I pushed her. Room, now. We'll talk about this in a minute. Lila stomped off and Ethan sank onto the couch. Isabella sat beside him, her expression stricken. They got to her, Ethan said flatly. The gossip, the rumors, whatever people are saying at work, it filtered down to the parents, and now it's reached the kids. And Lila's paying the price. What did the school say? He repeated the conversation. Isabella went pale. This is my fault, she said. I brought this into your life, into Lila's life. I should have been more careful, should have anticipated. Stop. This isn't your fault. It's the fault of people who can't mind their own business, and parents who talk about things in front of their kids. But Lila got hurt because of my decisions, because I couldn't keep my professional and personal life separate. Isabella, maybe Sterling was right. Maybe this is too complicated, too messy. She stood abruptly. Maybe I should go. Go where? Home. Away. Somewhere that isn't making your daughter's life harder. Ethan stood and caught her arm. Don't. Don't do that. Don't make decisions based on one bad day and one kid saying mean things. It's not going to be one day, Ethan. This is what it means to be with me. People will always talk. There will always be assumptions and judgments and consequences that touch everyone around me. Then we deal with it, together, like we've been dealing with everything else. You say that now, Guy. Lila, Ethan called down the hall. Come here, please. Lila emerged looking sullen and defensive. I already said I'm not sorry. I know, but I need you to tell Isabella what happened today. All of it. Lila crossed her arms. Emma said you were only dating Isabella to get a better job. She said her mom said you were using Isabella, and that Isabella was stupid for falling for it. She said it in front of everyone, and they all laughed. So you pushed her, Ethan said. She called you a user, and Isabella stupid. What was I supposed to do? Use words instead of pushing. I tried words. She didn't stop. Ethan looked at Isabella, who had tears in her eyes. Lila, nobody thinks your dad is using me, and I'm not stupid. Emma's mom doesn't know anything about our relationship. Then why did she say it? Because sometimes adults say mean things when they don't understand something. It doesn't make it true. But now everyone at school thinks you're stupid, and Dad's a user, and I'm the kid whose family is weird. Your family isn't weird, Isabella said firmly. Your family is strong enough to handle people saying unkind things, and smart enough not to let those things change what you know is real. That's hard. I know, but pushing Emma didn't make it easier, did it? No, Lila admitted reluctantly. Now I have to go to the principal's office and write an apology letter, and Miss Jennifer said I might lose recess for a week. That sounds fair, Ethan said. You know you can't push people, even when they're being awful. I know, but I wanted to. Wanting to and doing it are different things. Tomorrow, you're going to apologize to Emma, and then you're going to use words next time someone says something mean. What words? How about, that's not true and you don't know what you're talking about? Can I say you're being a jerk? No. That's not fair. She was being a jerk. Doesn't mean you get to say it. Lila looked between them, her expression shifting from defiant to uncertain. Are you going to stop dating because of this? No, Ethan and Isabella said at the same time. Are you sure? Because Emma also said you wouldn't last. She said her mom said relationships like yours never work. Isabella knelt down to Lila's level. Emma's mom is wrong about a lot of things. Your dad and I are going to keep dating because we want to, not because of what other people think. But that means sometimes there will be days like today where people say mean things, and we all have to be tough enough to handle that together. I can be tough. I know you can, but tough doesn't mean pushing people. It means not letting their words change what you know is true. Lila thought about this for a long moment. Okay, but if Emma says it again, I'm telling you, and you have to say the words to her mom. Deal, Isabella agreed. That night, after Lila was in bed and had extracted promises from both of them that they weren't breaking up, Ethan and Isabella sat in the kitchen with tea neither of them was drinking. I almost ran, Isabella said quietly. When you told me what happened, my first instinct was to leave. To protect you and Lila by removing myself from the equation. I know, I saw it on your face. Why did you stop me? Because running doesn't solve anything. It just teaches Lila that when things get hard, the people she cares about disappear. I won't do that to her. Not again. Isabella reached across the table and took his hand. I don't know how to do this. Be part of a family. Handle conflicts that involve a child. Navigate school politics that have nothing to do with quarterly earnings. Neither do I. I'm making it up as I go. You're good at it. I'm really not. But I'm committed to figuring it out. And so is Lila, apparently, since she's willing to risk losing recess to defend our honor. She shouldn't have to. No. But she does. And we make it worth it by showing her that the things worth having are worth fighting for, even when the fighting is uncomfortable and messy and involves writing apology letters to 7-year-olds named Emma. Isabella laughed, and it was watery but genuine. This is not how I imagine my life going. Better or worse? Scarier, but better. Definitely better. They sat there in this quiet kitchen, holding hands across cold tea, and Ethan realized that this was what building something real looked like. Not smooth or easy or free from conflict, but worth the work of showing up day after day and choosing each other despite all the reasons it would be simpler not to. The meeting at Lila's school the next morning was exactly as uncomfortable as Ethan expected. The principal was sympathetic but firm about the zero-tolerance policy. Lila read her apology letter to Emma, who accepted it with the grudging grace of a child who'd been coached by adults. Emma's mother was conspicuously absent, which Isabella noted with a tight smile. Lila lost recess privileges for 3 days and had to write an essay about conflict resolution. She accepted the consequences without complaint, though she did inform Ethan on the car ride home that Emma hadn't actually apologized for saying mean things in the first place. Life's not always fair, sweetheart, Ethan said. That's a terrible lesson. But an accurate one. Things settled after that, returning to whatever passed for normal in their reconfigured life. The gossip at work died down. Lila's classmates moved on to other dramas. Isabella started keeping a toothbrush and spare clothes at the apartment, small invasions that made the space feel more like theirs than just his. And slowly, carefully, they built something that felt sustainable. Not perfect. They argued about work-life balance and how much time Isabella spent at the office and whether Lila needed to eat quite so many chicken nuggets. But real, with rough edges and compromises, and the kind of trust that only comes from surviving difficult things together. One Saturday morning, about 6 weeks after the investigation concluded, Ethan woke to find Isabella's side of the bed empty. He'd gotten used to her staying over on weekends, falling asleep beside her and waking up to stolen quiet moments before Lila bounded in demanding breakfast and attention. He found Isabella in the kitchen making pancakes while Lila supervised from the table, offering detailed instructions on proper dinosaur pancake construction. They need longer tails, Lila was saying. That one looks like a deformed turtle. It's abstract dinosaur art, Isabella defended. It's a blob with legs. Harsh but fair. Ethan leaned against the doorframe and watched them, this snapshot of domesticity that had snuck up on him. Isabella in his kitchen wearing one of his old t-shirts, his daughter critiquing her cooking, sunlight streaming through windows that had seen so many mornings just him and Lila alone. You two are up early, he said. Lila wanted pancakes shaped like specific dinosaurs, Isabella explained. Apparently I'm not skilled enough to freehand a proper stegosaurus. Nobody is, Ethan assured her. It's an impossible standard. They ate breakfast together, the three of them crowded around the small kitchen table, and Ethan thought about all the ways his life had changed in the past 3 months. How a random late night at the office had led to this. Pancakes and terrible dinosaur shapes, and a woman he was maybe falling in love with laughing at his daughter's commentary. It was terrifying and imperfect, and nothing like what he'd planned. It was also the best thing that had happened to him in years. After breakfast, Lila went to her room to play, leaving Ethan and Isabella alone with the breakfast dishes. I was thinking, Isabella said as she dried plates, my lease on the penthouse is up next month. Are you renewing? I don't know. It seems like a waste to pay for a place I barely use anymore. Ethan's heart started beating faster. What are you saying? I'm saying this apartment is cramped and your couch is terrible and Lila deserves a bigger bedroom. but it feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in the last decade. Isabella, I'm not proposing we move in together officially. That's too fast and probably irresponsible. But maybe I could not renew the lease. Find something smaller, closer to here. Be more present instead of always dividing myself between two places. You want to be more present? I want to be where you are, where Lila is, where things feel real instead of performed. She set down the dish towel. Is that completely insane? Probably, but I think we've established that insane is kind of our thing. She smiled, and it was that genuine smile he'd come to recognize, the one that meant she felt safe enough to be honest. So you're okay with it? Me being around more? Yeah, I'm very okay with it. Lila might have opinions. Lila has opinions about everything, but I think she'll be on board with this particular plan. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and Ethan tried not to think too hard about what this meant, where it was leading, all the ways it could still fall apart. For now, it was enough that Isabella wanted to stay, wanted to build something with them, wanted to turn their accidental collision into something intentional and lasting. The future was still uncertain, it always would be, but uncertainty felt different when you weren't facing it alone. 3 months later, the call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Ethan was knee-deep in a system migration that should have been straightforward, but had turned into the kind of technical nightmare that made him question his career choices. His phone buzzed with Richard Sterling's name, and he felt that familiar spike of anxiety that came from direct contact with the board chairman. Mr. Cross, do you have a moment? Yes, sir. I'd like to meet with you and Ms. Hart in my office. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. It's important. The line went dead before Ethan could ask questions, which seemed to be Sterling's preferred communication style. He texted Isabella immediately. Sterling wants to see us both tomorrow, 9 a.m. Any idea what this is about? None, but it's probably not good news. Good news comes through email. She was right. Good news didn't require face-to-face meetings with the board chairman. Ethan spent the rest of the day trying not to spiral into worst-case scenarios while simultaneously running through every possible mistake they could have made in the past 3 months. Had they violated some disclosure policy? Had someone filed a complaint? Had the board decided their relationship was too complicated after all? That evening, Isabella came over for dinner looking as tense as he felt. Lila picked up on the mood immediately. What's wrong? She asked, pausing mid-bite of spaghetti. Nothing's wrong, Ethan said automatically. Dad, you're doing the worried face again, and Isabella looks like she's about to throw up. Something's definitely wrong. We have an important meeting tomorrow, Isabella said. It's making us both nervous. What kind of meeting? The kind where powerful people decide things about your life, Ethan said, then immediately regretted it when he saw Lila's expression shift to fear. Are they going to fire you? I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. Hopefully not. Can they fire Isabella too? Technically, yes. She works for the board so they can remove her if they want. Lila put down her fork, her 7-year-old mind working through the implications. If you both get fired, can we still live here? Will we have to move? And there it was. The fear that lived underneath every child of a single parent. The knowledge that stability was always conditional, always one bad day away from collapsing. Ethan had thought they'd moved past that, built enough security that Lila didn't have to worry about these things anymore. Apparently, he'd been wrong. We're not going to lose the apartment, he said firmly. No matter what happens tomorrow, we're okay. You're okay. But what if, Lila? Isabella reached across the table and took her hand. Your dad has been doing his job well for years. I've been running this company successfully since before you were born. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're both going to land on our feet. And even if the worst possible thing happens, you still have 2 adults who care about you and will make sure you're taken care of. That doesn't change. Promise? Promise. Lila seemed somewhat reassured, though she spent the rest of dinner quieter than usual, pushing spaghetti around her plate and stealing worried glances at both of them. After she went to bed, Ethan and Isabella sat on the couch and tried to prepare for every possible scenario. What if they're offering you a promotion? Isabella suggested without much conviction. To what? I'm already operations manager. The next step up is VP level, and there's no VP position open. Maybe they're creating one. Or maybe they've decided our relationship is too much of a liability, and they're forcing one of us out. Optimistic. Realistic. She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They'd gotten good at this, finding comfort in proximity, in the simple fact of not being alone when things felt overwhelming. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Isabella said quietly, "I don't regret this. Any of it. That sounds ominously like a goodbye." "It's not. It's just acknowledgement that we took a risk, and even if it doesn't work out the way we hoped, it was still worth taking. You're definitely making me feel better about tomorrow. Sorry, I'm catastrophizing." "We both are." They went to bed early, but neither of them slept well. Ethan lay awake listening to Isabella's breathing, thinking about all the ways their carefully built life could fracture, all the decisions that had led them here, all the moments where a different choice might have kept things simpler but less meaningful. Morning came too fast and too slow simultaneously. Lila was unusually clingy at breakfast, hugging both of them longer than necessary before school. Ethan dropped her off and watched her walk into the building, his chest tight with the weight of uncertainty. At the office, he met Isabella in the lobby. She was wearing her CEO armor, perfectly tailored suit, hair immaculate, expression giving nothing away. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. "Ready?" she asked. "Not even a little bit." "Me neither. Let's go." Sterling's office was on the top floor, a space designed to intimidate with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that probably cost more than Ethan's car. The chairman was already there, along with two other board members Ethan recognized but had never spoken to, Sarah Chen and Michael Rodriguez, both heavy hitters in the tech investment world. "Thank you for coming," Sterling said, gesturing to chairs. "Please, sit." They sat. Ethan tried to read the room, looking for clues and expressions and body language, but everyone was professionally neutral. Sterling folded his hands on his desk. "I'll get straight to the point. The board has been discussing the future leadership structure of Vanguard Systems, and we've made some decisions that affect both of you." Here it comes, Ethan thought, the other shoe finally dropping. "Isabella, your leadership during the crisis with Damien and Marcus was exemplary. You identified a serious threat, handled it decisively, and protected the company's interests. The board has full confidence in your continued role as CEO." Isabella nodded, but her expression didn't change. She was waiting for the second part, the complication that would undermine the praise. Sterling turned to Ethan. "Mr. Cross, your work during the investigation was equally impressive. You identified system irregularities that could have gone unnoticed for months. You demonstrated technical expertise and ethical integrity, and you helped build an airtight case. That level of competence and judgment is rare." "Thank you," Ethan said carefully, still waiting for the axe. "Which is why the board would like to offer you a newly created position, Vice President of Systems Integrity. You'd be responsible for overseeing all technical operations, implementing security protocols, and serving as a check against the kind of internal manipulation we experienced with Damien. It's a significant promotion with commensurate salary and benefits." Ethan's brain stalled. "I'm sorry, what?" Sarah Chen spoke up. "We're offering you a VP position, Mr. Cross. Substantial raise, executive benefits, direct report to the CEO. It's recognition for the work you've already been doing and an investment in preventing future security breaches." "But," Ethan looked at Isabella, trying to read her reaction, but her CEO mask was firmly in place. "That would mean working directly under Ms. Hart. Given our relationship, isn't that a conflict of interest?" "It would be," Sterling agreed, "which is why we're implementing a modified reporting structure. You'd technically report to the board through a designated liaison, me specifically, with operational oversight remaining with Ms. Hart. It's not perfect, but it addresses the immediate conflict while allowing us to benefit from your expertise." "You're offering me a promotion," Ethan said slowly, "and redesigning reporting structures to accommodate my personal relationship with the CEO. We're recognizing talent and solving problems," Rodriguez said. "That's what boards do. The alternative is losing a valuable employee because of unnecessarily rigid policies. That seems counterproductive." Ethan looked at Isabella again. This time her expression had shifted slightly, surprise and something that might have been hope. "What do you think?" he asked her directly. "I think you've earned this. Your work during the crisis was exceptional, and the company needs someone in that role who understands systems security at a fundamental level. But it's your decision. If the modified reporting structure makes you uncomfortable, would you be comfortable with it?" "Yes. I trust Sterling to provide appropriate oversight, and I trust you to maintain professional boundaries when we're at work. We've been doing it successfully for months already." Sterling cleared his throat. "Mr. Cross, we need an answer today. If you decline, we'll begin a search for external candidates, which will delay critical security implementations. If you accept, we'd like you to start transitioning immediately." Ethan's mind raced. A VP position meant financial security for Lila, opportunities he'd never imagined, validation that his work mattered beyond just keeping systems running. But it also meant more pressure, more visibility, more ways for his relationship with Isabella to become complicated. He thought about Lila asking if they'd have to move, about the fear in her eyes when she thought their stability might evaporate. He thought about all the times he'd chosen safety over ambition, protecting what they had rather than reaching for what might be possible. Maybe it was time to choose differently. "I accept," he said. "Thank you for the opportunity." Sterling smiled, and it was the first time Ethan had seen the chairman look genuinely pleased. "Excellent. Sarah will work with you on the transition details. We'd like to announce this next week, along with some other structural changes. Congratulations, Mr. Cross." The meeting concluded with handshakes and logistics discussions that felt surreal. When they finally left Sterling's office, Isabella maintained perfect professionalism until they reached the stairwell, where she grabbed his hand and squeezed hard. "You're a VP," she said, and there was pride in her voice. "Apparently, that just happened, right? I didn't imagine it?" "You didn't imagine it. You earned it, and you said yes. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might choose stability over risk. You have Lila to think about, and this position is going to be demanding and complicated and occasionally terrible. So was dating you. I took that risk too." She laughed, and it was that real laugh he loved. "Fair point. Come on, VP Cross. We should probably go tell your team before HR sends out the announcement." The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulations and transition planning. Ethan's team reacted with genuine happiness. Apparently, he'd been a good enough manager that they were pleased to see him promoted rather than resentful. HR walked him through new benefits packages that included things like stock options and executive health care that made him dizzy to consider. By the time he picked up Lila from school, he was exhausted and overwhelmed and still processing. "Did you get fired?" Lila asked the moment she got in the car. "No, I got promoted." "What's promoted?" "It means they're giving me a bigger job with more responsibility and more money." "So we're not moving?" "Definitely not moving. In fact, we might be able to move somewhere better eventually, if we want to." Lila considered this. "Can we get a house with a yard?" "Emma has a yard, and it seems really useful for dinosaur excavation projects." "Maybe. Let's see how things go." "And Isabella didn't get fired either?" "Nope, she's still CEO." "Good. I'd be mad if they fired her after all the pancakes she's learned to make." That evening, they celebrated with pizza and ice cream, which Lila declared was the best possible dinner, even though it had no nutritional value whatsoever. Isabella came over after work, and they told her every detail of the day, Lila demanding to know exactly what a VP did and whether it meant Ethan would have to wear uncomfortable suits all the time. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but probably not every day." "That's disappointing. I wanted to see you suffer." "Thanks, sweetheart. Your support means everything." After Lila went to bed, Ethan and Isabella finally had a moment to actually process what had happened. "I still can't believe they restructured reporting just to make the promotion work," Ethan said. "That's not normal, right?" "Nothing about our situation is normal, but Sterling's pragmatic. He saw a problem and found a solution that benefited everyone." "Do you think people will say I only got promoted because of you?" "Probably. People will say lots of things, but you know the truth, I know the truth, and the board knows the truth. That's what matters." "Is it though? What about all the people who'll assume I slept my way into an executive position?" Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, that's going to happen. I won't lie and say it won't, but here's what I've learned. People who want to diminish your accomplishments will find a reason regardless of the facts. You can either let that stop you from taking opportunities, or you can take them anyway and prove through your work that you deserve to be there." That sounds exhausting. It is. But the alternative is worse. Trust me. Ethan thought about everything that had led to this moment. The late-night encounter, the couch arrangements, the conspiracy they'd uncovered, the relationship they'd built despite all the reasons it should have failed. None of it had been smooth or easy or followed any recognizable path, but it had been real. I need to tell you something, he said, and you need to not freak out. Isabella tensed. That's a terrible way to start a sentence. I know, but I need to say it anyway. He took her hands. I love you. I'm in love with you. I have been for a while, but today made me realize I need to actually say it instead of just assuming you know. She stared at him, and he watched several emotions cross her face: surprise, fear, joy, terror. You love me, she repeated. Yeah, is that okay? It's terrifying. But okay. I don't know. I haven't let myself think about love because love means vulnerability, and vulnerability means people can destroy you. I've spent my entire adult life making sure no one could destroy me. I'm not trying to destroy you, Isabella. I'm just trying to be honest about what this is, what we are. I know. That's what makes it scary. She squeezed his hands. I don't know if I love you yet, or maybe I do and I'm just too afraid to admit it, but I know I choose you. Every day I wake up and choose you and Lila and this life we're building. Isn't that the same thing? I think it might be better, Ethan said honestly. Love can be passive, something that happens to you. Choosing is active. It's deciding that despite all the complications and difficulties, this is worth fighting for. Then I choose you. Is that enough? It's more than enough. They kissed, and it felt different from all the other kisses. Not desperate or stolen or shadowed by crisis, but grounded in something solid and real. This was what they'd been building toward without realizing it. This moment of acknowledging that they weren't just surviving together, but actually creating something intentional. The weeks that followed were chaotic in entirely new ways. Ethan transitioned into his VP role, which meant learning executive politics, attending board meetings, and navigating the complicated dynamics of being the newest member of leadership while dating the CEO. It was uncomfortable and occasionally awful, and he definitely understood why people usually avoided mixing personal and professional lives. But he was good at the job, really good. He implemented new security protocols, reorganized system oversight, and identified 3 more potential vulnerabilities that could have been exploited. Within a month, even the skeptics who'd questioned his promotion were acknowledging he'd earned the position. Isabella watched him navigate executive leadership with something that looked like pride. They still maintained careful boundaries at work. No personal conversations in the office, no public displays of affection, absolute professionalism in meetings. But at home, they were just Ethan and Isabella, partners in the messy business of building a life. Isabella officially gave up her penthouse lease and found a smaller place 10 minutes from Ethan's apartment. It wasn't moving in together. They both agreed that was still too fast. But it was close enough that the morning routine included her more often than not. She kept clothes in his closet, toiletries in his bathroom, books on his shelves. Lila stopped asking when Isabella was coming over and started assuming she'd be there. 4 months after Ethan's promotion, they were having dinner when Lila dropped a bomb disguised as casual conversation. Emma's mom apologized to me today, she said through a mouthful of mashed potatoes. Ethan and Isabella both looked up. What? Ethan said. Yeah. She said she was sorry for saying mean things about you guys and that she shouldn't have talked about adult stuff where kids could hear. She was kind of crying. It was weird. What brought this on? Isabella asked. I don't know. Emma said her parents are getting divorced, and her mom's been really sad. Maybe she felt bad about being mean before? Ethan and Isabella exchanged glances. Later, after Lila was in bed, they tried to piece together what had happened. Maybe she just grew a conscience, Isabella suggested. Or maybe watching her own marriage fall apart gave her perspective on judging other people's relationships. Either way, at least Lila's not dealing with that particular drama anymore. It was a small moment, barely worth noting, but it felt symbolic somehow. Not everyone who dismissed or criticized their relationship would come around, but some would. And the ones who didn't matter as much as the people who chose to stay and support them. 6 months after the promotion, Sterling called another meeting. This time, Ethan was less terrified. He'd learned that Sterling's meetings weren't always precursors to disaster. The board is pleased with your work, Sterling said without preamble. System security has improved dramatically. We've prevented 2 potential breaches, and your team's morale is the highest it's been in years. Well done. Thank you. We'd like to offer you a seat on the executive committee. It's primarily advisory. You'd provide technical perspective on strategic decisions, but it comes with additional equity and increased influence. Ethan blinked. That's significant. It's recognition of value. You've proven yourself capable of thinking beyond operational concerns to strategic implications. We need that perspective. I accept. Sterling smiled. You're getting better at accepting opportunities quickly. I'm learning that overthinking doesn't actually protect me from risk. It just delays the inevitable. Wise observation. One more thing. The board would like to acknowledge Ms. Hart's successful leadership over the past year. We're extending her contract with a significant performance bonus and renewed confidence. Please pass that along. You could tell her yourself. I could, but I thought you might enjoy delivering good news for once. That evening, Ethan came home to find Isabella and Lila building an elaborate dinosaur habitat out of cardboard boxes and construction paper. It looked like a crafts store had exploded in his living room. What is happening here? He asked. Science project, Lila explained. We're demonstrating prehistoric ecosystem dynamics. That sounds complicated. It is. Isabella's doing the hard parts because she knows about business ecosystems, and I'm making it apply to dinosaurs. That's definitely a skill transfer. Isabella looked up from where she was cutting cardboard with more focus than the task probably required. How was your meeting with Sterling? Good. Great, actually. I got invited to join the executive committee. Ethan, that's amazing. And he told me to tell you that the board is extending your contract with a substantial bonus. He told you to tell me. Why wouldn't he just... She stopped, understanding. He wanted you to share good news with me. That's surprisingly thoughtful for Sterling. He has his moments. Lila looked up from her dinosaur construction. Does this mean we can afford a house with a yard now? Possibly. Why, are you that serious about dinosaur excavation? Very serious. This apartment doesn't have enough space for proper paleontological research. She's not wrong, Isabella said. We are getting cramped. Ethan looked around the apartment that had been his home for 5 years. The space where he'd raised Lila alone, where Isabella had first crashed on his couch, where they'd built something real out of improbable circumstances. It was small and cluttered and full of memories both painful and beautiful. Maybe it was time for something bigger. 2 months later, they stood in the backyard of a 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools and quiet streets. It had a yard big enough for Lila's excavation projects and a kitchen with enough space for all of them to cook without tripping over each other. The mortgage was terrifying but manageable with Ethan's VP salary. This is insane, he said, staring at the house. You keep saying that about every major decision we make, Isabella pointed out, because they keep being insane. And yet they keep working out. Lila ran past them, already planning where her dinosaur dig sites would go, completely unbothered by the enormity of the decision. To her, this was just the next adventure, the next chapter in a story that kept getting better. Should we do this? Ethan asked. Buy a house together? Officially merge our lives in a way that's really hard to untangle if things go wrong? Are you planning on things going wrong? No. But I didn't plan on most of what's happened in the last year either. Isabella took his hand. I'm not going to promise this will be easy or perfect or free from complications. We both know better than that. But I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you and Lila and a house with a yard for dinosaur excavation. I'm choosing to build something permanent instead of always keeping one foot out the door in case I need to run. That's a big choice. It's the biggest choice I've ever made, and I'm making it anyway. They bought the house. It took 3 months to close, during which time they argued about paint colors and appliance brands and whether the dining room needed a chandelier. They disagreed about almost everything, but they kept choosing each other through the disagreements, kept showing up even when it was annoying or frustrating or hard. Moving day was chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture that didn't fit where they thought it would. Lila helping by unpacking her dinosaur collection in the middle of the living room. But that evening, when everything was still half unpacked and they were eating pizza on the floor because they couldn't find the kitchen table yet, it felt like home. Dad? Lila said through a mouthful of pepperoni. Yeah? Are you and Isabella going to get married? The question landed in the middle of the room like something physical. Ethan and Isabella looked at each other, both clearly unprepared for this conversation. Why do you ask? Isabella said carefully. Because Emma's parents got divorced, and now Emma's sad all the time. And I don't want you guys to get divorced, so I thought maybe if you got married first, it would be more permanent. That's not exactly how it works, sweetheart, Ethan said. Marriage doesn't guarantee people stay together. Sometimes people get married and it still doesn't work out. But sometimes it does work out, right? Sometimes it does. So why not try? It was the kind of logic that only made sense coming from a 7-year-old, but it hit harder than it should have. Why not try? They'd already taken every other risk, already chosen each other through crisis and complication and corporate warfare. What was one more commitment? We'll think about it, Isabella said finally. But right now, let's focus on getting this house unpacked before we're buried under cardboard boxes. That night, after Lila was asleep in her new bedroom, Ethan and Isabella sat on the back porch watching the city lights in the distance. She asked about marriage, Isabella said. I noticed. Does the idea terrify you? Completely. You? More than almost anything. She leaned against him. But I'm starting to think being terrified might be a sign I'm doing something important instead of something safe. Is that a yes? It's a maybe. Ask me again in 6 months after we've survived living together full time and I haven't run screaming back to corporate isolation. Deal. They sat in comfortable silence, and Ethan thought about how far they'd come from that night on the 43rd floor when he'd found a stranger sitting on the floor looking lost. How one improbable decision had cascaded into a completely different life, one that was messier and scarier and more meaningful than anything he'd planned. 6 months later, Ethan proposed on a random Tuesday evening after dinner. No grand gesture, no elaborate plan, just the two of them doing dishes while Lila practiced reading in the next room. He turned to Isabella, soap suds on his hands, and said, I still think this is insane, but I want to do it anyway. Will you marry me? She looked at him with soap bubbles in her hair and dish towel in her hands and said yes without hesitation. They got married in the backyard 4 months later, a small ceremony with close friends and colleagues, and Lila as the very serious flower girl who'd insisted on wearing her dinosaur sneakers under her dress. Sterling attended and gave a speech about taking calculated risks in both business and life. Leo cried during the vows, which he blamed on allergies despite the clear weather. It wasn't perfect. Ethan forgot his lines twice. Isabella's voice cracked when she said, I do, and Lila dropped her basket of flower petals halfway down the aisle and had to be gently redirected. But it was real and honest and exactly right for who they were. The reception was in their backyard, catered food and string lights and music that ranged from classical to the dinosaur documentary theme song because Lila had strong opinions about the playlist. Ethan danced with his daughter, watching Isabella across the yard talking with board members and laughing at someone's joke. And he felt something settle in his chest. This was success. Not the promotion or the house or the impressive title. This, people you loved, moments that mattered. A life built with intention despite all the reasons it could have failed. Later, when the guests had left and Lila was asleep in her room, Ethan and Isabella sat on the back porch steps, still in their wedding clothes, exhausted and happy. We did it, Isabella said. We actually did this insane thing. We've done a lot of insane things. True, but this one feels different, more permanent. Having regrets? Not even one. You? Just that we didn't do this sooner. She laughed and kissed him, and it tasted like champagne and forever. The years that followed weren't easy. They argued about work-life balance, about parenting decisions as Lila got older, about whose family to visit for holidays and whether they had time for another dog, despite Lila's increasingly persistent requests. They faced challenges at work, economic downturns, board disagreements, and the constant negotiation of being married to your colleague. But they also had Saturday morning pancakes and terrible dinosaur shapes, Lila's middle school graduation, where she gave a speech about following your instincts even when they seem crazy, family vacations where they argued about directions and laughed until they cried. They built a life that was complicated and imperfect and absolutely worth every difficult decision that had led them there. Ethan learned that success wasn't about having all the answers or making perfect choices. It was about showing up every day and choosing the people and things that mattered, even when those choices were terrifying. It was about being brave enough to accept help when it was offered, to take risks when they made sense, to build something real instead of something safe. Isabella learned that power didn't mean isolation, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that the strongest thing she could do was let people see her as human instead of invincible. She learned that home wasn't a place she had to protect by keeping people at a distance, but something she could create by letting them get close. And Lila learned that family wasn't just the people you were born to, but the people who chose to stay, who showed up through the hard parts, who built something permanent out of moments that could have been temporary. 10 years after that night on the 43rd floor, Ethan stood in the backyard watching Lila, now 17 and heading to college in the fall, help Isabella with the garden they'd planted together. The house had expanded to accommodate their growing life, filled with memories and arguments and moments of grace. Isabella looked up and caught his eye, and even after a decade together, there was still that spark of recognition, that sense of having found something rare and valuable. "What are you thinking?" she called across the yard. "That I'm glad I offered you my couch." "Your terrible couch that gave me a permanent crick in my neck?" "That's the one." She walked over, leaving Lila to handle the garden alone, and wrapped her arms around him. Best worst decision either of us ever made. Top 5 at least. They stood there in the backyard of a life they'd accidentally built, and Ethan thought about all the ways things could have gone differently. If he'd kept walking that night, if Isabella had found a hotel, if they'd chosen safety over connection at any of 100 crucial moments, but they hadn't. They'd chosen each other, imperfectly and repeatedly, building something that lasted not because it was easy, but because it was real. And in the end, that was the only kind of success that actually mattered.